Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to this special stream on the Australian referendum and the Aboriginal voice to Parliament. As always with these things, to give people some time to get in, etc., I'm going to start us off by playing a tune. Okay, let me do this. Hang on. There you go, Chris. I have no idea what's going on here. There you go. Right, that should be Chris. Good day, Chris. I'm just going to start us off with a bit of music to give people a chance to get in, and then we'll get into it.
Are you already live?
Yeah, we are already live. We were going to get called late and gay otherwise.
Yeah. Late and gay.
Oh, dearie me.
Won't sing Matilda, won't sing Matilda, you'll come, won't sing Matilda with me. And he sang as he watched and waited till his billion was, you'll come, won't sing Matilda with me. Down came a jump back to bring out the billabong. Up jumped the swagman and grabbed him with glee. And he sang as he stole and jumped back in his tucker bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he stole and jumped back in his tucker bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Once the jolly swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. And he sang as he watched and waited till his billy was. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he watched and waited till his billy was. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Down came a jump back to bring out the billabong. Up jumped the swagman and grabbed him with glee. And he sang as he stole and jumped back in his tucker bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he stole and jumped back in his tucker bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me.
Well, that's it. And it appears we've lost Duke. I don't know where he's gone.
Oh, God.
And apparently the Franklin isn't able to get on because he can't find the link to the stream. And he needs Duke to email it to him, and Duke is not here to read the chat, so I don't know what's going on.
Oh dear.
Anyway, we can sort of get it started. We can kick it off a bit.
Chris,
All right, we're going to be
yeah. You could do the acknowledgement to country.
exactly. We're here today to give. I'm here to acknowledge the traditional owners of our lands, elders past and present, and we respect their blah 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 blah. Oh, here it is.
It's got to be done. Got to be done.
That's right. Okay, right, Duke. What's going on? What are we talking about today? Hello.
Okay, I don't know what's going on there. Computer, everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Don't know what was going on there, guys. Sorry if I didn't have one. I am.
You need to email Franklin the link, mate, because he has not received it. So just email it to him, and I can't message him on Twitter for some reason.
Yeah, I did send it to him on Twitter and on Discord, but I
email it. He needs it in his email.
Yeah, I'll send it to him just now, mate. Once we get started. I don't think Franklin's coming on straight away anyway, but yeah, I will email it to him just as soon as we start. Who would like to start us off?
Well, I think we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Chris. Anyone who follows this channel should already know me. I make music for this sphere. I don't know how that happened, but it just happened. I make renditions of folk music and all that sort of stuff. And I'm here as the only true resident Australian, 9th generation Australian, to discuss these matters today. And yes.
I think the Franklin's also a pretty has got a quite long family history in Australia. As well.
Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, I've only lived here for 23 years. I don't know. How long have you lived here, Lady of Shallot?
Oh gosh, well, I've lived here twice. I lived here for 2 years, about 20 years ago, and then moved back in January 2020, just before COVID. So everything was great for about 6 weeks, and then it wasn't. And then it got really bad, as you know. Yeah, so I suppose most of the audience will know me as a moderator on quite a few channels. I've got my own little channel now. I homeschool a group of children. I get involved in a bit of activism. I've actually volunteered for the campaign to be a volunteer for the No campaign. So I'll be at polling stations, haranguing people, that kind of thing. So yeah, I do what I can when I can for as long as I can.
A tin rattler for the cause.
Yeah. Oh, my husband's Australian, I should say. His family came over in the 1800s from Germany. Yeah.
There you go. And the Franklin has just put something in the chat. My maternal grandfather was a 10-pound pom. All the other branches are from the 19th century. So there you go, Chris. You're not the only true blue Aussie on the stream. And as I said, I've lived here for 23 years now, so that's quite a long time.
We'll adopt you. We'll adopt you. That's all right.
Oh, look, if I'm asked, I'm an Englishman who lives in Australia, but here we have another one of our guests, Furius. How you going, mate?
Hello, everyone. Apologies for my slight impunctuality, but lovely to be here. And our fellow panelists here, Mr. Gard and the wonderful Lady of Shallot. Hello.
Lovely to see you.
Are they Furious?
Indeed, are they?
And I think Furious's family have been here since not long after World War II, at least, eh?
Yes, late 50s, that's correct.
So there you go, another long-term Aussie. All right, guys, look, I've got to go off and send an email to the Franklin. So if you guys would like to start discussing the subject, obviously we want to talk about the actual thing that the referendum is on, which is the voice to Parliament. And I know that Chris, for example, has done some quite deep research into this. But we also want to talk about how it's a bloody bad idea anyway. But I mean, I'm not going to say too much this evening because I've got some very knowledgeable guests.
Well, I wouldn't say that I've done extremely deep research. For the most part, I've just read the bill, which isn't difficult because it's quite short and it's in the most simplistic language I've ever read out of this faction of society. So, and I think particularly because it is in a way trying to be accessible, both as a readable document to the sorts of people that it's going to be servicing, which is obviously the Indigenous people. They are not known for their high education. But other than that, it's really just a testament to the sort of the state of our politics as it is now. It's truly like it's basically just the whims of a child's emotion on all levels with this sort of topic and this issue, because it's really just a totally flailing, emotionally hijacked, utterly nonsensical waste of everyone's time, in my opinion. But I'll give it to you guys to sort of just give me your takes on it, and then I'll sort of interject as we go.
So who would like to start? What about
it
you?
Would be rude, it would be rude for me to not allow ladies first, but I'm happy to go if you don't want to, Shallot. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, this Indigenous Voice to Parliament came out of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which was in 2017. So this has been sort of cooking for some time. And as Chris says, it's just deeply vague. But what they have said is that they want 35 local voices, each one individually selected to be the voice of the community they represent. And at national level, there'll be 24 members. One thing that struck me as quite interesting was they're saying that they must have a gender balance. Well, I can already see that running into trouble, because they're going to have to define gender. Now, some Aboriginal tribes have this mysterious third gender. Maybe that's how they'll get around this. I don't know. But they will really actually have to sit down and define gender, how many genders, and how you're going to balance this.
Well, of course, Lady Shallot, think of it. They're going to have to make a place for all, what is it now, 42, 45? I've lost count how many genders there are now, you know.
The whole thing is just an utter shit show. I mean, I've looked at it as well. I know Chris has read it because the Lotus Eaters did a very excellent video on this. I'd recommend anybody who hasn't seen it to watch it. And they referred to yourself in it. And it just, no detail at all. It's all great. You know, it's nothing to worry about. And they've actually said that they are not going to touch the Australia Day. Well, we all know that that's complete bullshit. The first thing they will go after is Australia Day, because they always have. It's just so vague. There's no detail, nothing.
It's worth probably saying, just on that note, if I may, Lady Shallot, that the seeds of that antagonism towards Australia Day have been quite gradual, though. You know, I mean, for instance, for those of us who say, you know, grew up in the 90s, for instance, which are, you know, obviously Gard and I fit into that category. You know, I certainly remember a time where there was only the slightest hushed whispers about disagreeing with the idea of Australia Day, whereas in the last, what would you say, 5-10 years, it's actually been a full-throated, like fire-stoked opposition to the idea, to the conception of Australia Day. And that opposition is basically an ideological bludgeon against the foundation principle and the foundation mythos of this country. And once they untangle that, but once they fray that and break it down, then everything else is up for grabs. That's sort of my take on that.
I sort of want to kind of describe this process a little bit to anyone that's not from here and they don't, because I mean it's complicated and it's not. It's complicated legalistically and how it's going to be structured within the government and how it's going to work. And honestly, looking at it, you know, from a pleb's point of view, you know, I'd consider most of the sort of I guess you call inter-institutional communication between different levels of government to be quite complex, and it's in its very nature to be complex. And I'm looking at this voice structure as well, and it seems to be like just as complicated, and I don't understand how these people are going to navigate it. So like you've got, you know, as Lady, you've got the local and regional voices, which was, as you said, it would be 35 members, correct, per region? Lady?
Sorry, yes, 35, and then 24 at the national level.
For the national voice, yeah. So you've got two-way communication on national issues between those two sections. So the section and then the subsection of the regional voices, and you've got, you know, the Indigenous communities that are relaying like stuff to the local regional voices, and they're in a two-way communication with what's called the partnership table, and that partnership table connects directly to all levels of government for what they call a coordinated approach. And on the regional voices also communicates by, you know, a national voice members selected by the regional voices to represent diverse perspectives, which we know is extremely diverse and completely fucking incompatible for the most parts, because the disparity in interests and all that sort of stuff between tribes is huge. As we know, they can't get their shit together. So they'll communicate from regional voices to an ethics council, which then communicates to the national voice, which then says, in quotes, provides non-binding advice, end quotes, which is between the Australian Parliament and the Australian government. And it says non-binding because legally the Australian, like the executive government and the Australian Parliament, don't actually have to abide by any of their advice or take it and act on it. But we all know, that the High Court and the Australian Parliament and the government is completely fucking hijacked by whatever ideology is favouring this. So, they say, they don't have the power to veto, but that the High Court can rule anything they fucking want. So it's basically going to bring most of the process of the government that involves land. So this is sort of brought into question with the West Australian Heritage Act, which we've spoken about at length before. It basically means that, they're going to have the power to slow the government down to a grinding halt on basic decisions when it comes to stuff like surveying land for mining, surveying land for farming, continued agricultural processes, and all that sort of stuff. So it's really just, it's basically taking an already like hulking, inefficient machine and just coating it in fucking super glue. So that's basically what it is, from the outset, from a pleb's point of view, if that makes any sense.
I just don't understand how they think it's going to work.
It would work if you were dealing with extremely competent and very politically savvy and educated people, but you're not. You're dealing with, you just, I can't say much more because I'll get you in trouble. But
no, I know. We're gonna have to watch what we say here.
Yeah. Can I just say, guys, look, I totally agree with what you're saying there, Chris, and also you, Lady of Shallot and Furious. I'd just like to welcome the Franklin.
Hello.
And maybe you'd like to introduce yourself because the other guests already have.
Okay, thanks for having me. My name is the Franklin. I have my own channel. I haven't done a scripted video for a while, but I do streams. I do one called Love Letters from Your Betters, which is where I sort of analyze the lefty media, and I do a monthly stream. This month it's going to be a week late. Normally I do it on the first Sunday of the month, but it's going to be the second. Yeah, I don't know. I won't go on and on. That's probably enough.
I'd just like to say I've followed the Franklin for years now in various sort of areas around this kind of sphere of the internet, and he is absolutely one of the best channels from Australia.
Thanks. I'd like to comment on what Evan was just talking about. I think it's not meant to make sense. I think that's not the purpose of it. And I don't even know if that's necessarily in the mind of a lot of normies or the nitty-gritty. I think it's meant to be divisive. It's meant to destroy the heritage of this country. And I think everyone kind of knows that. The details, I think, are fairly irrelevant. I think everyone knows that whatever they say it would be is not what it would actually be. And as with everything kind of government related, it would be a bureaucratic nightmare. But I don't think that's sort of for us plebs to worry about. I think we're meant to just vote for it and let our betters sort it out afterwards.
Yeah,
I do agree. Sorry, Lady Shallot. I was just going to say I do agree that the first target that will come if this gets passed will be ending Australia Day, because all of these bloody people call it Invasion Day and all this bullshit.
Yeah, well, they've got a whole lot of things lined up. I mean, they're also talking about the Republic. So there was a referendum. I'm trying to think when that was now. 1999, was it? Or 90?
Yeah, 1999. It's over 20 years ago, 1999.
Yeah, I was fairly young when I got to vote in that, actually.
We were all young.
Weren't we all, Mr. Franklin?
Yeah, but I was actually, it was one of the first times I voted, I think. And that failed. I believe it failed on both counts. So these referenda, they need to pass 2 hurdles. And I think it failed both of the hurdles. It's a bit hazy now. But they're talking about reviving that. And I think that they would if they managed to be successful in this, because that one failed pretty dismally. And these referenda have a fairly bad track record. It's what, 8, is it? Out of how many? 40 something that have passed over the past century or thereabouts. So I think they would try to piggyback off any success with this to try to revive that one. I think they have multiple things lined up for sure. This is only the beginning.
Yeah.
I know that Furius comes from farming guys in the bush, and you had some things to say on another stream, I believe, Furius, about the problems this is going to cause to farmers and cattle station owners and what have you. So perhaps you'd like to go into that a bit.
Well, the thing is what's sort of, these are obviously two separate subjects, but they have arisen at the same time, and there's obviously a lot of intertwining and crossover between them, and that's obviously the occurrence in West Australia, whereas of tomorrow, the 1st of July, but essentially anyone who is operating, I think the cap for property is at, I think I got a square meters or like 1.1 hectares, whatever that cap is, and above that cap, a person or a company, by whatever guise it is, they will have to have their property surveyed for basically indigenous heritage, and to ensure that no places of worship or no spiritual grounds or what have you are harmed, with any development or any building or whatever. And there was actually a case, and funnily enough, the boys on Lotus Eaters actually touched on it, because I got a feeling a mutual friend of ours, Mr. Bogan, as he's known on Twitter, and by all means follow him, because he is. What's the bio? It's the wish.com version of Chris Gard. So, but he's a wonderful.
I think he's in the chat actually, or he was.
Yeah, he's in the chat. He's in the chat.
Of course he is. Yeah.
G'day,
but he's indeed G'day Bogan. He's a wonderful chap, and he actually works out, I believe, sort of like in like the Murchison Gascoyne area, so it's up into like the mid sort of central west up there somewhere, and also he's bought in, I believe he owns a little bit of land just south of Perth somewhere, or out of Perth somewhere, and again, like, if you want to do a fire break around your property, a physical, forget spraying, if you want to do a physical fire break with like a scarifier or a cultivator above any kind, you can't do it without this approval. If you want to for instance, tear out fences and replace fences and dig, use a post digger to place new strainer posts, you can't do it without this approval. Speaking of the Lotus Eaters, right? Because they were talking to Mr. Bogan about this, and that's how they got the information. It was a man, I believe, was in 2J, which is a little sort of town just north of Perth, where he wanted to place basically like a small vehicle bridge across a creek that ran through his property, and one of these, and you got to think this legislation hasn't even technically passed yet. This is under existing legislation, which is in place now, and a local, like Aboriginal council, representative group, I don't know what the exact terminology is, basically said that creek has some connotation with like a Dreamtime story about the serpents that create the rainbow serpents to create the waterways in Australia, and he was unable.
Sorry, just before you go in, an important thing that's missed out from that is that that farmer actually paid out the arse to go the right way and pay the local elders to come, and each of those elders are paid up to $1,250 a day to come out and tell you, yeah, that's fine, or no, you can't do this. He got the approval from the elders. They went over the whole thing with him, and I don't know, I guess they did a rain dance or a smoke dance or something, and decided that this is perfectly fine, you can do it. But the committee still said no, even in the light of the local elders who have, I guess, ostensibly they have like knowledge about everything in the sacred land in that area. No, not good enough. The committee says you can't do it. But even though you've paid surveyors and elders and everything to come out and do it, no. So it's basically just a fucking shakedown. The whole thing is a shakedown. In order for anyone to survey, to carve out new land, all that sort of stuff, they have to pay all these people, pay the commissioners, pay the elders, pay the that committee that you were talking about, and pay a surveyor who has to be approved by these groups. So you have to pay all these people just to do something, and then ultimately you might not even be able to do it because there's a fucking rainbow serpent living under here.
Exactly. And actually I just want to touch on something very briefly, because I did want to buttress something that Franklin just said just before. because both of these points are sort of important, and I think play into both the voice and the situation in West Australia with this this policy, this act that they've passed, and something that the Lotus leaders missed. I'm not saying that as a diss, just they did miss this point, is that by my understanding, that act was actually passed. So Mark McGowan won the election just before COVID happened. So essentially, I think the Liberals had, not that it matters because the Liberals are just as bad anyway. They're Labor with a paint job essentially. But they had, I believe, they have 2 sitting members at the moment in the lower house would be able to offer no objection anyway. And Labor also has the upper house in its control. But so Mark McGowan won the election, won in a landslide. Then COVID happened, and then emergency powers were passed. Therefore, even though they had both houses, they were essentially able to skate this act through without any kind of account or any kind of overview by the Nationals, Liberals, anyone. And it was done under the radar because for about a year we had statistics about these people. This is infection rates. This is how many are dying. Blah 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 blah. Like whatever. All this COVID nonsense that was blaring on our screens for 18 months flat. And so this act is kind of quite quiet as the worst things are, quite quiet under the radar was passed. And of course the date is tomorrow, June 1. So just to clear back to the point is that Franklin mentioned about how it's meant to be like this, and he's absolutely right. And let's not forget that whenever a government or an administration of any kind has ambiguity, that ambiguity is always used to their benefit. Whenever there's a gray area, it screws people like us, and it is used to interpret things in their favor when such decisions arise. It'll always be the ambiguity, 9 times out of 10 lean their way. And that also gives the judiciary wriggle room to go in their favor. It gives journalists and academics the wriggle room to also portray things to the advantage of the regime, shall I call it. Yeah. And also, in terms of ambiguity, the thing that you said about the shakedown, again, I was having this conversation, amongst, friends just a couple of days ago, family friends and family. And that is one thing we have to take into mind in terms of modern politics. And by that, I mean sort of like this side of the French Revolution or even this side of the Russian Revolution, right? Is that there are elements of the left specifically who basically view things in like either victim hierarchy or a class hierarchy, right? And those kind of that always have class enemies. And people like us, even if we're just like middle class, working class, blue collar, white collar, we live in the country or not, whatever. And also because just all of us, irrespective of what our financial or social class might be, right? Because I'm sure all 5 of us are from different levels of society one way or another. We just have the wrong wit. And so if they can crush the kulaks, if they can either boil the kulak in the pot like a frog, right, or they can just slowly strangle that kulak, they'll do it. And so, this is to fleece us, in a sense, to deprive us sovereignty over our own land that we have title and right over, right? Which, between commercial transaction and, ownership and whatever and taxation, because, of course, the government bloody taxes us both ways on it as well. We buy it, we pay tax. We grow stuff on it, we pay tax on that. We pay ourselves wages, we pay tax on that. And then when we sell it, they take capital gains, right? Like, they never miss out. But it's to erode our sovereignty, and it is basically to make, essentially, almost sustenance impossible. And that is how malfeasant the people who've conceived of this are. And people like us should never lose sight of that. And if this comes into conversation with anyone that we know, that's the angle we need to take. Because it is exactly that. It is in many, there's other factors to this. I'm sure we'll touch on it later in the stream. But essentially, it is a sort of a class resentment kind of, you have land, ergo going to just slowly, suffocate you and drown you with all of this red tape, all of these taxes, all of this erosion of sovereignty. And this, like Franklin says, is just the start. People think this is bad now. It's just the start.
Yeah. No, look, I totally agree with
Sorry for my rant, by the way.
No, mate. I totally agree with everything you said there. I'd just like to say to the chat, because, look, I realised most of what you're saying in the chat, and I'm sure most of my guests agree with. But this is YouTube. Yep. And if you go too far, then we won't be able to discuss this. And like, I don't think anyone on the panel, certainly, and I doubt many people in the chat are in favor of this, the voice thing. So if you would like to hear people arguing sensibly against it, then, you know, how about you let people do that? Because that's what we're trying to do. Like, this is the reason I went to some trouble to put together an excellent panel for this, so we could argue against it, because I think this is one we actually might win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Lady Shallot. Did you have anything to add to what Marcus was
No,
saying?
just in what you were saying about the chance that we can win it. I mean, one of the when you read the paper, one of the unique features of this constitutional referendum is the requirement for a double majority. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it means to succeed, it requires a majority of voters to vote yes nationally, and it requires a majority in a majority of the states. So 4 out of the 6 states must have a majority yes vote. And if you've been following the polls, which I have, and I know you all probably have too, the yes vote is tanking. And this is great. It's great. It's gone down. I think at the high point in August 2022, it was as high as allegedly 70%. Yes, it's down to 47 now with all the pollsters. So that's great. That's great. You know, the cost of living crisis.
Well, we do have to watch out for polls, because you got to remember that people that participate in polls is different from when people vote on referendums. But
absolutely,
I mean, if you're looking at states like you know, I mean, I don't know what WA is going to do. It seems like it doesn't matter what WA citizens vote for. You know, McGowan just rams things through, whether they like it or not. But places like Queensland and, you know, rural Victoria and New South Wales, I mean, we know most of the population is in the cities, but it's a hard one. I don't know anyone that supports
vote, so to speak. You know,
even the liberal boomers that I know are not okay with this. So I don't know. It might not go through. So
I mean, sorry, Lady Shallot, could I just say, South Australia has already got its own state version of the voice.
So does Victoria.
And Western Australia, Victoria, and Queensland are also working on them as well. And there is even a plan to change the name of Brisbane to some stupid Aboriginal name.
Mianjin.
That's right.
There is actually a plan to change the name of the great city of Brisbane, the capital of Queensland, to an Aboriginal name before the next Olympics, I believe, or Commonwealth Games, or whatever nonsense they're worrying about.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Which one last point I wanted to make as well, because it sort of tangents to what I said before, is and in a way it is good that the votes this voice is defeated at the in this referendum. All this way, it's probably the best out of the two bad options that we have. But there is something that people like us probably should be cognizant of, and that is that we know what the media are like, in the Western world generally, and particularly in Australia, they sort of have their own unique bent, and that is if and when the voice is, voted down in the referendum. My inkling is they're going to absolutely stoke the race angle to 11, and it will be these intolerant, xenophobic, racist white people who have objected to the vote, and it will give them ammunition to further stoke racial tensions in this country.
They're already using that messaging. They're preemptively using that message already. It's fucking
they're priming the fuel pump on it, aren't they? Like, you can just tell it's just they're thin little hints out there, right?
That could have backfired. I'd just like to mention that Wilm's Front is in the chat. Very good channel. Do go and follow him.
Good man.
Really does some good Australian stuff. I'm sorry to interrupt you. The Franklin, carry on, please.
Well, they could all backfire on people. I think one of the things that's going to come out of this, whether they're successful or not, because if they're successful, they'll be sore winners, and if they're unsuccessful, they'll be sore losers. I think this will actually red pill quite a few people, and the process of it, and seeing the way all of these major institutions in the media and so on have coalesced around this. I think that's actually going to be quite red pilling for a lot of people. Something I'm interested in, I don't know if anyone else knows anything about this, is to what extent other ethnic groups in Australia sort of break yes or no on this. And if there's actually any kind of strategy from the No campaign to try to convince them to vote no. Does anyone know anything about that?
No.
I think there is some, frankly, and I have, like, there are people on the conservative, well, let's say in inverted commas, conservative side of mainstream politics in Australia, who do have Aboriginals who are against this.
Yeah, I was talking about other ethnic groups like Chinese or Indians. So Chris Seymour asked me this in the chat because I was thinking there's actually really low-hanging fruit here for the No campaign. They could be very sort of cynical about the way they do this, but they could actually target ethnic communities and say, you didn't do anything to the Aborigines, even sort of a tacit kind of position of, well, you know, these bad white people, but that's not you. So why should you be punished for what white people do? And if they were clever, they would say, all right, this suburb has a lot of Chinese people, or this suburb has a lot of Indian people, or whatever, and actually prepare material to that effect in their languages, in Mandarin or in Hindi or Tamil or whatever, and actually market that specifically to them and say, you would be discriminated against by this. You've done nothing to Aborigines. Why should you be punished for this? That would, you know, it's kind of a cynical thing because it's sort of playing both sides in a sense. But
you are the supreme cynic, Frank. So.
Well, that's right. That's right. And that's exactly what I would do. I would say I would sort of dial up the kind of anti-white rhetoric there and say, you know, these evil white people, but you didn't do that, so why should you be punished for that? Rather than try to get them to have solidarity with white people, get them to see it purely in terms of their own self-interest and the fact that by the fact that they wouldn't be Aborigines, they would also be discriminated against. I think that would be a really interesting angle for the No campaign to do, and to really target specific communities in their own languages, actually. That's
well considered, actually, Franklin.
I don't actually expect very much
of
the
Lebanese guys around Melbourne. I could imagine them going for that for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like there are a lot of ethnic groups who either might be broadly sympathetic. Like, imagine Europeans who have been here since just after World War II. I imagine, say, the Italian community is probably broadly sympathetic to the No case.
It's okay. You can say WOG, Franklin. I won't be offended.
But some of the more recent arrivals, you know, I don't think they care one way or the other. Actually, they don't have any connection to Australia's past. But we should actually use that to our advantage and say, all right, if we live in this modern multicultural paradise, why would you be discriminated against? I think they should try that approach.
I'm
132nd
Chinese, so I'm just going to lobby for the Chinese.
Yeah. Look, I don't expect a lot from the No campaign. I'll be surprised if they do things like that, because I think they'll play up the kind of civic nationalism and very sort of like normie friendly stuff.
Yeah,
but I think they should be very.
What they're doing. But
you have to be really targeted like that. You have to say, all right, well, you know, go to Box Hill in Melbourne and find someone who's on the No campaign who speaks fluent Mandarin, get them to write you something that'll fit on a flyer, something very pithy, and then just say, all right, whatever, we go into a big leaflet drop in Box Hill in Mandarin, and we go to some other suburb where they have other ethnicities, and really targeted. Like, don't send them stuff in English. Send it to them in Vietnamese or in Tamil or Hindi or Mandarin or whatever.
I totally agree with you, Franklin, but I'd just like to bring up Brian Borrow's point in the chat here. What did the Aborigines call Australia before the white man landed? And that is to say, first of all, Captain Cook, and then, of course, the first fleet in 1788. They must have 1,000 languages. Did they even have a concept of the land they were on? They certainly did not have a concept of Australia as one landmass. Not at all. Not even slightly. I'll pass this over to the guests, but so far as I understand it, no. They were a mass of little tribes and groups.
They didn't call it anything, but God called it Terra Nullius.
Yeah. I believe they didn't have a word for it. They didn't even have a word for land. And they didn't have a word for left and right. They didn't have any of that.
No, and it seems so strange that they continuously use the term First Nations people. So that's the most updated NPC word term for Aboriginals.
Copied
that's
from
not
America
even true
and
because
Canada. Copied from America and Canada.
They had no concept of nation. They had no concept of borders. They had no concept of any of that stuff. They literally, I don't even know how they conceptualize themselves as being of the land. Like I never really looked much into it when it was rammed down our throats at school. But ultimately, they, sort of generally they were considered of the land rather than owning the land. So yeah, it seems weird that they've done this sort of gypsy switch with
and just
being
on
my land.
And on that point, Gard, I'll say too, probably the only thing, and I'm saying this to sort of steel man the argument ever so slightly, is that the only how can I put this? Like the only notion of collective belonging they would have been sort of tongue, like as in certain tribes or groups of tribes would have conversed to each other in a certain way, and ergo there would have been a friendliness between those groups of Aboriginals who are familiar, but there would have been no identity either beyond that or above that, if you get what I mean. Like as you've said, there are no references or notions of nation, of title, of ownership, of like you say, of the land, rather than the being of the, or I can't remember how you phrased it, but exactly what you just said. And just on that point very quickly, because it is worth sort of saying this from a historical standpoint, is that if you sort of go back far enough in time, right, that when you sort of consider what markers a civilization can be identified by, if you go back to, say, the Bronze Age, and so I'll keep this brief because I know this isn't about this, but I'm just making comparison.
He's going to talk about Rome.
He's going to talk about Rome and Greece. I know.
Nobody say the word dictator, by the way.
Exactly, I'll get really mad. But seriously, I'm actually not going to mention Rome at all. If you go to the Anatolian Civilization Museum in Ankara, in the modern day today, which is a very good museum, I suggest going to it. It's fantastic. You see clay tablets, right, written in cuneiform from the pre-Bronze Age collapse. You're talking 3,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 BC, right? And there are tablets which address, for instance, a legal dispute between a husband and wife parting ways, and what are the rights of each, partner as such. And even though in the modern day we'd consider that quaint, you got to think, for the time in which that event occurred, it's actually quite a development in how humans interacted with each other. The fact that there's an embryonic, sort of formation of ideas of law, of process, of procedure, of social dynamics, of ethics playing into law, social organization, all of these things, right? And I mean, because a lot of that originates in the Fertile Crescent. You're talking Mesopotamia, Syria, the Caucasus Mountains, Eastern Anatolia, Egypt, those sort of places, the Levant, Syria, etc. And then we have this idea that we have First Nations people in Australia, when those people referenced had no concept of nation. That there is one of the great ironies of this. Sorry, I just thought that was worth inserting into this discussion, because that's often lost in the wash.
It is, and I just wanted to pick up on Tim Wilmsfront's point in the chat that a lot of this garbage comes from this book Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe, which it's a 2014 book which purports to be non-fiction but is utter fiction. And it claims that Aboriginals had agriculture, engineering, and building construction. But this book, anybody knows about this book, it has done so much damage, though, Chris, because so many young people have read it, and I have had to argue with them, and they say,
the Aboriginals built no permanent structures ever.
I know, but this guy says they did. Yeah.
I think one of the most damaging things that was ever brought up was the myth of the barbarism of the stolen generation, which was basically fabricated by Peter Reid, and we talked about that in our Australian stream.
We did, Chris. Yep. Can I just say to people, look, if you want to get the early history of Australia, which started with the landing of the First Fleet in 1788. Then I've done 2 streams with Chris so far on that, with Chris Gard here. And I'm hoping we're going to do a 3rd stream when Chris can do it. But Chris recently became a father, so obviously it's been delayed a bit. So, but yeah, carry on, Chris. I'm sorry, mate.
No, I was actually just thinking because I sort of wanted to bring it back to this voice bill. And now there were obviously dissenting voices in the parliament when this was sort of being bandied about to be put to a referendum. And you were asking if there were any Aboriginal voices that were, or any Aboriginals that were in politics that were dissenting in this, and Warren Mundine was one of them. He's sort of another sort of civic nationalist type, but he opposes it on the grounds of it being racist and divisive and all that sort of stuff. But sorry, go.
No. Sorry, I didn't realize you weren't finished.
No, I was just going to say. So one of the dissenting voices was coming from the Liberal Party, and it is very like a lot of it's sort of legalistic. I hate a lot of this sort of political legalism that goes on when they're squabbling over minor details in subclauses and all this sort of crap. When the big issue is the very concept of this bill in the first place. But they're all too tick and shit to actually talk about why it's bad. But there are some glaring fucking problems here, and one of them in their dissenting notes of this bill, which is at the end of this advisory report, and it's 13 questions, and none of these questions were. The reason these questions exist is because there is no information on this. So they're trying to push this constitutional alteration through, and they're trying to create this new institution, and they literally have no idea how the fuck it's going to function. They don't know what they're going to do. They don't know who's going to be in place. They don't know what they like. So the first question is, who's going to be eligible to serve on the proposed body? Okay, that could be answered. But what are the prerequisites for nomination? We don't know. Will the government clarify the definition of Aboriginality to determine who can serve on the body? We don't know. And we also know how fucking blasé they are about that. If you're 1/32nd Aboriginal, you can claim rights. How will members be elected, chosen or appointed? We don't know. How many people will make up the body? We said 35 and to the for the locals and whatever it was for the national.
24. Yeah.
How much is it going to cost the taxpayers annually? We don't know. What are the functions and powers? We don't know. Is it purely advisory, or will it have decision-making capabilities? It'll be both. Who will oversee the body and ensure it is accountable? We don't know. If needed,
will there be rights of appeal?
If needed, can the body be dissolved and reconstituted in extraordinary circumstances? Probably not. How will the government ensure that the body includes those who still need to get a platform in Australian public life? Don't know. How will it interact with the closing the gap process? Lol. Will the government rule out using the voice to negotiate any national treaty? We don't know. So these were questions that were asked during the debate and still remained unanswered. And I don't think they ever will be, because as the Franklin said, it's designed deliberately to be vague. And as I stated earlier, the very fact that they literally said, and I quote, this is directly from the people that were putting this together, we will build it as we go. So they literally don't even know what the institution's function is going to be, or what it's set to achieve. And like the reason they don't know what it's set out to achieve is because the people that they're citing as inspiration, one of them being the Statement of the Heart, which I should add has some real David Lane's naughty precept sort of vibes about it. I'll quote a bit of it here. This is from the Statement of the Heart. Sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. So basically blood and soil, which I would appreciate if it was for us. But
I just think the people who actually made the land fertile and built a civilization, maybe, but wandering around with bark huts, maybe not.
But the reason they're not going to be able to ever make this like a pointed and directed and clear and very well structured institution is because the people that they're citing that are contributing to this as an institution, none of their shit even makes sense. The things that they're saying about what they need, what the needs and demands of their constituents are, they're all they literally contradict themselves in the same statements. When they're trying to provide a case for this institution, so it makes it. It's no surprise that it's just a completely flailing, nonsensical bunch of shit because there's just no structure to it whatsoever. So,
but Albo says it's a modest request. It's a modest request. Modest request.
to destroy every Anglo-Celtic and white heritage in Australia. It's a modest request, really. Yeah, I believe it.
I think it's a bad move to get lost in the weeds about history, because I think, firstly, you're not going to be able to unpack all the falsehoods in people's historical views. You're not going to be able to change their view of Australian history in a short conversation at a voting booth or what have you. So, and I think quite the contrary, that it would be very, I think that's what the people for the Yes campaign actually want. I think they want to be able to portray this as a bunch of racist white people who are salty at the fact that they're going to have to share now. So I think it's a mistake to go down that route. I think we have to think very much from the normies' point of view. Normies are fully invested in this modern mythology of equality and democracy and all of that sort of stuff. And I think what we really have to do is kind of use liberalism against itself and say, well, these people, just in very simple terms, there should just be a very simple slogan for this campaign: vote no to racism. Now, we might sort of agree with these guys for blood and soil, sort of for the wrong reasons, but that's definitely not how the normie sees it. And we need to just have something very simple, like vote no to racism, vote no to division, or something like that. A/B test these slogans, whatever. But we need to come at it from that angle with people, because if you start getting lost in the weeds about history, they can think, oh man, this guy's just some white supremacist loon, and he just doesn't want to give up his white privilege. We need to just put it in terms that the normie can understand. And going back to what I said about different ethnic groups as well, the average Chinese guy in Australia, he doesn't give a shit about the Australian flag or heritage or whatever, Captain Cook or the First Fleet or whatever. That's completely irrelevant to him. You need to put it purely in his, in terms of self-interest. And you need to say to people,
I completely agree with you.
We're meant to have this multicultural paradise.
I'm not.
And here
I'm
are these
sorry,
fuckers trying to divide everyone.
The Franklin, I'm sorry, but I will draw the line at allowing them to eat dogs.
No, I completely agree with you. I would have the exact same approach with normies as well. I'm just saying, in this round table where we're sort of going through it, it's cool.
We absolutely can't get lost in the weeds on all of that stuff, because it will play into every stereotype that the left wants of, oh, these are just a bunch of people who don't want to give up their white privilege. So we need to think like the normie, and the normie is going to be like, oh yeah, they're going to respond better to an argument like you're going to be disenfranchised essentially, or there's going to be a third chamber of parliament. That kind of argument, we have to really hammer that home to people, and all this stuff, like there's no detail on this. Who knows what the government would do? Blah blah blah. I think we have to really hammer those points rather than get lost in the weeds talking about history or whether Aborigines had agriculture or engineering or whatever. I think that's the wrong approach.
I do agree with you, Franklin.
To normies, yes.
I do agree with you, to normies, as Chris says.
But everyone else is going to be on our side, or they're going to be far leftists who are, we both kind of agree, but for different reasons. We're not going to convince people on the far left.
No.
Well, we're never going to convince people.
I don't want to convince those people. I want to wall them off.
We're not going to convince those people. But I would just say that the fact is the Aboriginals were so weak. Like, they were vastly more weak than, for example, the American Indians, or Native Americans as they now call them, although they came from Asia originally. The Aboriginals were vastly more weak than the American Indians, and yet, strange to say, they weren't wiped out by these awful British invaders.
But that's not how the normie sees Australian history. It
doesn't
matter whether that's true or not.
But it's just so obviously true.
Well, evidently it's not obviously true, though. That's why the normies don't think like we do.
But look at their schooling and the mainstream media, the Franklin, as I know you know very well.
But that doesn't change the facts on the ground.
I was just going to say, I've been talking to some normies, and one thing I can tell you, there's one particular person that has triggered them, and that is Thomas Mayo, who is the architect of this voice document. and he's great. He is the gift that keeps on giving. Just give him more exposure, because as you all probably know, some tweets that he made way back in 2020 asking for the rent to be paid. If they want wages, I'm not sure what work they did, but they need to have unpaid wages, and of course reparations. And these tweets have been unearthed, and yeah, he's great. Just get more exposure on this guy, because
but yeah, Lady Shallot, Lady Shallot, you're correct. But Thomas Mayo is, first of all, he's a Torres Strait Islander, not an Aboriginal. And like I lived actually, and I lived in the Torres Strait for a couple of years, right, on Thursday Island. So I do know these dudes, and they're a lot more intelligent than your average Aboriginal. Anyway.
Oh my goodness, yeah, he's smart. Yeah.
But they've had like
communist.
Oh yeah, I'm going to come on to that, Chris. But yeah, they are a lot more intelligent than the average Aboriginal, because they've had big inputs from Polynesians and also British people over the years. And this dude himself is possibly a quarter Jewish. I don't know if that's true or not.
He is. His mother's from London, and she's from a Jewish part of London.
Well, that's perfectly possible. That is perfectly possible.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that, because this isn't the platform to go into those things.
You can't on YouTube, certainly. But
he's smart.
But and he's at least half white stroke Jewish. And he is totally in full favor of the Communist Party. He even says about how much he likes the Communist Party.
Yeah.
And this is one of the main guys behind this thing.
Yeah. He's the architect. Yeah. He went around the country consulting with people before he wrote this document, and he's everywhere now. And it was Albo called him a giant. I'm on the people I'm on this stage with, I consider as giants. Yeah.
Was that just after Albo was bending over for him, or what?
Yeah, something like that. Everyone, Prime Minister Modi included. Yeah.
I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, but I've got a really good nickname for Albo, actually. If this doesn't pass, Laryngitis Tony.
Excellent.
We should meme that. If this fails, we should meme that.
I know it's going to come somewhere between, as I think it was Chris said in the chat earlier, between the Republican referendum, where it was played really well, is how much more power do you want to give these fucking politicians, which was rejected. And the last referendum that I voted in, and of course I voted no, for same-sex marriage, where all these idiot Australians voted, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah. So we are somewhere in between.
Just on that point of the gay marriage, I'm just reminded. I hate to be the left of hypocrites guy, but I should point out that actually, I think it's like $365 million has been spent so far preparing for this referendum. And the gay marriage referendum cost something like $525 million or something like that. And I don't know if you guys remember. Sorry, what did you say?
It was a plebiscite. It wasn't a referendum.
My mistake. Sorry, the plebiscite. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was non-binding as well.
And I don't know if you guys remember just how much the media and the Cosmo public whinged about how much was spent on the democratization of the vote for the gay marriage, decrying, that at least 500 million could have been like saved if they just rejected the plebiscite and held a parliamentary vote instead. It's funny how, like, when it comes to their political wants, they defer to the elitist concept of state decree by government decision, because they know that the political class share their gay ideology. But when it comes to the other side wanting something, they defer to democracy and the will of the people. Unless, of course, the will of the people disagrees with them. But I just thought that was a funny thing that,
I think this is a bit different to that one, though, because I think that very much bought into the whole kind of liberalism and give everyone equal rights if they're not doing anything to anyone else, blah, 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 all of that kind of thing. This is actually, in effect, trying to punish people, or at least with this guy Mayo, that's becoming clear that this would be a way to not not just to give something to someone, but to take something from someone else. So I think this has a much bigger chance. I mean, that was basically 2/3 in favour, wasn't it? I don't think we'll get anywhere near that for this one. I think people.
Yeah, well, they said that about
more
the gay marriage plebiscite. So,
I mean, I was overseas at the time, but that looked to me like that was something that was going to be on the cards. This, I think, people are a lot more cynical about this one.
Okay. Yeah, there's something that's like icky about the race question to the general public. I think that So, I think
and the fact that Elbow as the face of it, but others as well, they're very cagey about offering details and all of that. That's always a big red flag to people. If you can't just say what you're getting at, if you have to sort of beat around the bush, people are immediately going to say, well, you know, what's this guy hiding from me? What's going on here? I think that's. I mean, the gay marriage thing was pretty much out in the open. You knew what it was, but this thing,
destroying marriage, yeah.
Well, yeah, sure, but with this, they're really cagey about it, and I think that is really setting a lot of people off. Ironically, I think if they just come out and said what they wanted, they might have had more of a chance of getting it than being really cagey about it.
I think that's a good point, Franklin, because insofar that, you know, we as, you know, those that we sit on the right and those who have sort of perennial or traditional sort of interpretations of the world and beliefs, you know, we can have our objections to the, you know, to the plebiscite that was had a couple of years ago, and, you know, the LBG agenda writ large. You know, we have our reasons for not going along with it, but in the end, those reforms, or if you want to call it, or sort of that sort of those degrees of subversion that have occurred over a long period of time, they exist on, you might say, like a time scale, a plane. Like they attempt run one rung at a time. It's always the case. You know, it sort of starts at first wave feminism and then it sort of ends here, but it takes a long time. And there's a trajectory that's sort of, you know, it's visible. Or if it's not visible, you can at least guess what that trajectory is like. I think what's more hazardous about this one is that this is sort of like going from, you know, open to shut. Like there's sort of no mid ground here. This is quite literally opening up a you know, like a you know, like it's like the door of a dam, and if the dam wall bursts, it's just going to all come in one hit. Because in the end, something like this can be made to be sort of infinitely reductive. It can be it can be used subjectively to whatever measure by the academic class, you know, journalistic class, the you know, the judiciary, and etc. And there will be essentially no limit to interpretation because of the ambiguity. Something we touched on earlier. Franklin, you and I more or less sort of, you know, came to that point already. But it's that ambiguity that could empower the system dramatically. And I think that's what they're cagey about, is people realizing that this ambiguity is actually powerful. And if, you know, if Joe Citizen actually puts two and two together, but that the ambiguity is what makes it powerful, then the cat's out of the bag, so to speak.
Yeah, people, I think it really grates on people with the sort of the national mythology or religion, or however you want to describe it, of egalitarianism and multiculturalism and liberalism more broadly. It's easy enough to sell people on the idea, okay, we'll give this thing to this group so that they have the same rights as everyone else. It's a whole other thing to say, we'll give them this thing, but that's going to be at the expense of some other group. And I think that's what people are really worried about with all of this. That essentially, as you just said, we don't know what the details are, and there's a pretty good chance that the details are going to come at most people's expenses. I think people kind of see that.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that's why the polls are trending downwards for the yes case and upwards for the no case, and the uncertainty between them, that's disappearing as well.
Yeah, indeed.
I mean, who knows with these polls, right? I mean, I'm surprised actually that Albanese has made such a big deal about these things. I think he's a real amateur, actually. I mean, I know I spoke with a couple of people about this on Twitter, but I think he's really just bungled this. The way to play this would have been the way they did it in the US, which is don't admit any that you're losing, that there's any possibility of defeat, and then just say, well, the polls were wrong. Look, here are the results. You know, make sure that you have the right people counting the results and you get the right result, and then you just say, well, look, we won. That's how it is. Don't be a sore loser.
And just keep the public face intact. Like, for instance, as much as it pains me to say this, and the panel could disagree, but for instance, my perception of this would be that, say, for example, in say alternative realities, right? If say Bill Shorten was Prime Minister today and leading the Labor Party, he probably would actually carry it through because he had a very different way of expressing himself. Not to say that's necessarily better than Albo's. I think Albo is actually in many ways more relatable. But Albo does come off amateurish, and he comes off as overly emotional as well. Whereas Shorten, being a union man, had a much better, you might say, poker face. And I reckon someone like Shorten probably would have got over the line, personally speaking.
Yeah, Albo. It's the sort of thing of if you're trying to.
Sorry, I was just going to say he cried when this a few months ago when discussing this up. Look, he's in big trouble because what he's done is intrinsically link his political career to this. And I was living in England when the Brexit vote happened, and David Cameron intrinsically linked himself with the vote against leaving the European Union. Now, when the vote to leave, everyone said the majority of people said they wanted to leave, came through, he had to resign the next morning. So, Albo is linked himself far too emotionally. He's got emotionally wrapped up with this.
That was the best day of my life, by the way.
It was great. It was great.
It was so fabulous. It was so fabulous.
It was a great day.
I mean, Albo's weakness notwithstanding, it's clear that this referendum bill was completely astroturfed through Parliament, like largely due to the new current ideology of the political class. And I strongly believe that there's an understanding that if referendum comes out as no, which I'm predicting it will be, as you guys are saying as well. I've said this before, you probably all heard it, but it'll just get ran through the back door by enacting it at the state level or through legislative loopholes. Based on the majority outcome of the parliamentary vote on the bill, it's clear that the government is set on making this happen, whether we want it or not. And I just suggest that this referendum is just a joke vote to make the public think their opinion actually fucking matters, which it doesn't.
Well, but see, if they should have, maybe they still will, ask for some advisors from Joe Biden to come out and show them how to do this rather than fucking colonial amateurs, right?
The Franklin, did you see Joe Biden's recent statement where he said Russia is losing the war in Iraq?
No. I'm talking about I'm talking about voting here. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that happened 3 years ago.
The most popular president America has ever
had.
Yeah.
Sure, but it's is it Stalin, the quote about the person who counts the votes? If Albo hadn't been such an amateur about this, they would have, because they can always get a poll that's going to say that they won a week before and then just say, okay, well, that was the one that was correct, and the others that said we were going to lose, they were incorrect. And look, here are the votes, and anyone who disagrees is a conspiracy theorist, and 90% of people would have fallen in line, and too bad for the other 10%. Most of the people who would have voted no still would have fallen in line. But he's such an amateur that he's broken his poker face now. And people, it's that sort of midwit meme where the guy in the middle can't understand that the average person, the sort of average voter who doesn't get really obsessed about this stuff, actually picks up on, is this guy taller than his opponent? Is this guy better looking than his opponent? All this sort of stuff. And the guy who can look kind of in control versus the guy who loses his shit, people immediately are going to turn on the guy who loses his shit.
Well, think of the most iconic instance of that in the last 20 years, right? Or, like I said, in our lifetimes. And that is, think of the 2004 election and that very, very famous handshake between Mark Latham and John Howard. One act, one incident completely transformed the campaign, which you got to think that 2004 election was up to that point pretty line ball. And then, Howard and Costello won both houses because of the perception of one incident. And all it takes is one slip up, if it's bad enough, to actually career an entire election campaign off the rails. It was a handshake. It wasn't even that big, but it was the way it was perceived.
And Latham turned out to be one of the least worst Labour guys. So,
Yeah,
surprisingly
well, what happened? He got depressed and like his marriage broke down and got red pilled. Like he just he got Robinson in retirement, you know.
Yeah, and the thing is that even if he'd been in, he still would have had a party machine pulling the strings.
Yeah, exactly.
Bad as Howard was, Latham still would have ended up being worse simply because he was in the ALP.
He would have suffered a similar fate to Rudd
by
in
the
that
whip.
sense, you know. He would have suffered that same fate as Rudd because he wasn't necessarily factional, you know, and one of the factions would have toppled him eventually, you know, as they did Rudd.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's been a huge mistake that Albanese has broken.
Do you think
face.
Albanese will get toppled if he loses?
Absolutely,
this, which I think he might.
Absolutely,
Yes.
because
Have to go.
by next year it's going to be apparent that we'll be in a fully fledged recession. And I mean, it's incredible that Dutton, of all people, because that guy, you know, he's kind of a weird looking dude. Even when he had hair, he was a weird looking dude, and he's very uncharismatic. No, he's always been like,
Just
what did you
shave
do when
it,
he was
guys.
younger?
You're losing your hair. Just shave it.
He was very awkward. Well, no, it's not male pattern baldness. He's got some weird, I don't know what that's called.
It doesn't matter. Just shave it. If
Yeah.
you're
But
losing
anyway,
your hair, shave it.
the point being, it's really weird that he's been rehabilitated, or potentially he could be rehabilitated because he's got no charisma, and he's sort of, a lot of people don't like him. But yeah, Albanese will be gone because by then we'll be in a fully fledged recession. And Dawson, if he's sensible, will say, look, you guys are struggling to pay your electricity bill or your mortgage, and this dickhead wanted this completely irrelevant thing that has nothing to do with the fact that you're struggling. And I think the ALP is going to look at this and say, by the end of this year, we're going to be a year and a half at the most from a federal election. So they'll need to dump him so that they'll have enough time to bring someone else in and let them sort of right the ship. So he'll be gone by Easter of next year at the latest, but it could be by the end of the year. I think it'll be by the end of the year.
So long as we win this referendum, of course.
Well, that's right. But that's what I mean, in that if they had just kept the poker face, they could have pulled this off. But I think people are actually, oddly enough, that's going to invite more dissent and more people going over to the no side, because people everywhere, I mean, human things, they don't like weakness, but especially in Australia, we don't like sooks. So if he's going to have a sook, that's just going to turn a lot of people over to the other side. And having opened that door where he's sort of saying, oh, it's bad that we're losing now, he's opened the door to the fact that they could lose. If he'd done the sort of the Democrats in 2020, then he could have just pulled it off. They would have done what was necessary to get it over the line, overtly or covertly, and then they could have just said, well, don't be conspiracy theorists. But he's opened the door to a legitimate L.
Well, all right. I've got to ask this of the true blue Aussies in the chat. Like dictator Dan Andrews, a detestable.
You said dictator?
Yeah, a detestable, vile man who did the longest lockdowns in the whole of the world during the largely fake China virus nonsense. Got re-elected and lost no MPs as far as I can work out overall. I was amazed that Victorian Australians, and I know you, the Franklin, are in Victoria. I was amazed.
Deja vu.
I was amazed that Victorian Australians voted for this scum.
Well, Victoria's a very left-wing state, but also
Melbourne is, to be fair, but
yeah, but Melbourne's 70-something% of
yeah,
state.
absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't live, I live out in the countryside. It's not out here, but three things. I mean, firstly, it's a left-wing state. Secondly, the opposition were completely useless and looked useless. And thirdly, love him or loathe him, Dan Andrews is a strong man, and people like that about him. And compared to
I don't know. I reckon I'd knock Dan Andrews down with one punch, but I'm
no,
58.
politically he's a politically he's a.
Sorry, I'm joking. I'm joking.
He's perceived as being strong. So It doesn't surprise me at all. But Albanese is not like that. Dan Andrews at no point during that whole pandemic at no point admitted that he might have been wrong. And that's Albanese's fatal flaw in this. Once you do that, you open the door to an L.
Just on the topic of Dan Andrews, just quickly, he's sort of personifies and he's how can I put this? He sort of demonstrates that archetype of a politician who has, not necessarily, he's certainly not, he's not a Gavin Newsom, for instance, he's not a handsome man, and he's not even particularly charismatic insofar that, like a way that, like a Reagan was kind of charismatic, or, JFK was charismatic.
He's a fucking ghoul.
Exactly. He's a total ghoul. And he's if I may use a term of reference that our friend, Jolly Heretic would use, he's very much a genetic mutant in many ways. Right? But
high mutational load. High mutational
load. monumental.
The hunchback of Victoria.
Exactly. The hunchback of Latrobe, right? But the thing is, he's one of those like creatures of university and backroom politics, and really ensconced with the media and the academics, and they sort of form this wagon lug around him, and he understands how to use it all to his advantage, right? He really gets that game of sort of scummy left-wing politics, and even though he doesn't have those other attributes which would make him, you might say, a more naturally likable politician, he has all these factors that sort of reinforce political power. He has them absolutely locked into their place, right? And this is why, like, despite the fact that under his stewardship, hazard I use the word, Victoria has not done well, and Victorians have suffered under his heavy-handed approach, not just with COVID, but with everything else. Like, he's not run Victoria with any kind of aptitude or genuine fairness, or any kind of has certainly not brought prosperity to the Melbourne or Victorian population, either sort of materially or spiritually. Yet, he has not been turfed out of office. That is a man who understands power. He knows how to attain power and maintain it. And they're the kind of people that you sort of to be most. Not. I'm not saying this to you guys on the panel. I'm just saying this as a broad comment, that they're the kind of politicians one must be most wary of.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I'm saying that Albanese is an absolute amateur by comparison.
Yes.
Oh, totally. Like,
this will be his legacy.
He's been spoon-fed and he's lost.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can't count our chickens before they've hatched, but it's not looking good for him. Look, I think this is going to be his legacy. He is going to be laryngitis Tony. It's going to be who was it?
Too many cocks down his throat. You mean?
Who's that going to give? John Hewson. Is anyone old enough to remember him? He lost the unlosable election back in the 90s.
How does tea work with cutting cake, or whatever that famous interview is?
Yeah, and he lost the unlosable election. Well, Albanese has had massive institutional support, and he's still managing to bungle this, which is, he may yet pull it off, because he may get a tap on the shoulder, and more professional players may take over, but it's not looking good for him.
Why would anyone vote in Australia for one minority group to have a much more powerful influence on Australian politics than everyone else? Unless they were insane.
Maybe you should ask Enoch Powell. Oh, wait, we can't.
But Enoch Powell was in favour of the majority, Chris, not the minority.
Yeah, but he would be able to tell you that the black man's going to hold the whip over the white man. So.
Yeah, but I mean, this was in the days when there were almost no black men in England, and Australia has almost less now, even because there aren't that many Aboriginals. I think
there's 600,000, isn't there? Is that right?
Well, depending how many quarter and 10% Aboriginals.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I mean, like Tasmania has none really.
That's census data, so that's people that identify as.
Yeah.
So.
You in Tasmania, if you're lucky, you're like 15% Aboriginal if you claim you're Aboriginal at best. But that's ignored.
Yeah, that's spurious.
Yeah.
If I was to answer your question sincerely, Andrew, just for the sake of the exercise, I think it's the, and I mean I have obviously referred to this notion on other streams. It would have been mostly I think with AA, I'm pretty sure, but I think ultimately it boils down to the psychology of the white liberal and the white guilt that comes with being a liberal of European descent, and the fact that they are willing to, as a matter of course, and in a willful sense, to do it completely of their own, desires, their heart's desires, so to speak, to favor out groups over their own, and then to actually, how can I put, to see harm brought upon their own as a form of natural justice. And I think essentially there's not really a way to fix that. And I think when you look at the degree to which that sense of guilt has permeated and as over time, and you got to think it's occurred in the United States, it's occurred in Britain, it's occurred here, it's occurred in New Zealand. You've had this sort of pervasive ideology to sort of make its way through society, and rather than being what once upon a time was actually a small vocal minority, is now very much in danger of becoming the prevailing view, where people actually think, oh, my group are in the wrong, my group have all this historical evil that is about them, and all these other groups, because they're different from me, don't have that. And not only is that historically incorrect, ultimately these are people that had their own interests turned against them by the regime and by the levers of power, and there's not ultimately a cure to that, Iron Duke, frankly speaking.
But Furious, I totally agree with what you're saying. I absolutely do. But it was white European men, and even before that, Anglo-Celtic men, who were the very first in history to say, no, we're not going to have slavery anymore, for example.
Yeah.
Right? The very first. Every human group in history had slavery.
Correct.
Up until the late 1800s, when Europeans, and particularly Anglo-Celtic dudes, turned around and said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. It's just such a bloody lie. And I also notice in the chat, we have Scott Mannion, who has an excellent channel,
he does,
making a point, which I would also agree with, that I put up on the screen. I like Scott Mannion's channel. He has a good Anglo-Celtic British English channel. But yeah, look, but this, Furious, this yourself. It's like the only real advances there have been done by European people.
Yeah, but doubtless, but that's the thing. When this ideological seed takes root, and regrettably, it is societies that have well, when I say regrettably, it's just that it happens to be that the Anglosphere happens to be, one of the two offshoots of liberalism, because you obviously have English liberalism and French liberalism, which are very sort of, well, they're the same, they're cousins, but they are quite different in terms of philosophical frameworks.
They are different,
and I'm not the man to obviously articulate that. Like, someone like, say, like Carl Benjamin or someone who's like read Locke and whatever are better positioned to actually describe the differences.
Furious. We talked about this a bit on the Waterloo Day stream.
Oh, true.
And actually, I think you're a perfectly good man to talk about the differences, because there were differences. And,
there were differences. Yeah. And I just want to clear to the point, because this isn't the discussion point necessarily, but just the thing is that this kind of liberalism is the perfect breeding ground for that sort of self-loathing resentment that comes as a result of this sort of, you know, revisionistic history. And then once sort of liberal able to cultivate that, it becomes essentially like an intellectual and spiritual cancer. And the problem is that I think in some ways, like Middle America has probably fared best because the fact there's so much decentralized power in the USA, even with the behemoth of the government nowadays, which is this huge gargantuan, you know, cancer-ridden beast that Washington is. Like, there is still a fair bit of localized government and localized rights, which we just don't have in Australia and Britain anymore. So I think they have fared better. But the thing is, once those kind of individuals got their hands on the levers of power and were able to sort of, you know, federate, you know, to implement this stuff top down, right? You know, it's been fraught, and I dare say in some instances probably terminal now. That's the tragedy, because it affects all of us on the stream, and all of us who are watching, and you know, all of our friends and family, and all of their friends and family. It affects everyone. It's a tragedy.
So just the same way that, you know, someone like James Burnham would argue that, you know, liberalism inherently, no matter what form it's practiced or however it's interpreted, it will inevitably lead to a socialist sort of government and a socialist sort of authoritarian soft managerial state, which it does. The same applies to the trajectory. Like, it's always an imminent trajectory of what always was meant to be an imminent trajectory of the dignity culture and also in conjunction with the Rousseauian noble savage sort of concepts, which infected the 18th century thinkers and the 19th century thinkers. And, you know, it was bound to end up where we are now. This is a completely self-inflicted thing that's happening. It's all been engineered and pushed by us, the Anglos of Australia. Like, it's just the end point of our respectable dignity culture in conjunction with this. We protect the savages as subjects of the crown, and, you know, we give them equal legal standing and all that sort of stuff. So if it had been the French, as we always say, you know, they would have probably been wiped out given the amount of resistance that they gave. But we decided to coddle them, basically, and this is where we are. So we can't blame the Aboriginals for this. Like, this is all us. So
no, I agree, Chris. Could I just ask the Franklin, because I remember him saying this very clearly on one of his streams not so long ago. In about 1898, 1900, what percentage of homes had a piano in Australia?
Well, I don't know if it was a percentage of homes, but the population was about 3 million, and there were 700,000 pianos in Australia. Now, bear in mind, there would have been pianos in every school, you know, in multiple classrooms in schools, in public halls,
fair numbers of
churches and stuff as well.
Yeah. So, but I mean, it's 1 in 4 people roughly. One piano per 4 people, roughly. So I don't know. I don't think every house would have. I don't think the really poor people would have had pianos.
But that would have been the Franklin. That would have been like about the time of the Great Exhibition in Melbourne. Yeah, with the wonderful, beautiful exhibition hall that Melbourne is still so lucky to have, and that I've been into many times. So yeah, I was like, Australia was like a really cultured country back then. Also, of course, you had Dame Nellie Melba about then, who became one of the great opera singers of her era. So Australia was like really bloody advanced at that stage.
I believe Charles Darwin came to Australia and was sort of 30 or 40 years after the founding of some of the cities, because both Melbourne and Brisbane were founded in the 30s, the 1830s. I believe he came sort of mid-century, and he was amazed at how developed Australia already was. It was well under a century old at that point.
And you can wander around Melbourne today, and Melbourne even today has some of the loveliest 19th century houses, etc., that you can see anywhere in the world. Even great squares and what have you. Like really, really lovely buildings. It's just a shame that, as the Franklin says, all the soy boys and feminists want to sit on crates with the wind blowing up their ass in the winter. But yeah,
it's lovely. I was in there today. It's a lovely city, but it's full of not very lovely people, and a lot of homeless people now. You'll see lots of homeless people in the CBD now.
Mostly white men, strange to say, but there you go.
Well, there are lots of services for women and so on. But do people think that if the economy really starts to decline in the next few months, because they're talking about this being in October, so that's 4 months away. If the economy takes a decent hit over the next few months, do people think that will significantly affect the outcome of this?
Probably.
I hope so.
This is a pure issue of privilege, really. This is an issue of privilege and good material position.
They polled Australians recently, and I think only 1 in 10 were even remotely concerned about the voice. They're concerned about inflation, the housing crisis, the rising cost of living, how they're going to pay the bills. This is the reality of it. I mean, inflation's there. I read an article in the Financial Review it was with the deputy head of the Reserve Bank of Australia, who says that 140,000 people approximately need to lose their jobs to slow the economy down, because there's more and more people spending money, and that's pushing up inflation. And they think that people need to lose their jobs to slow that down. So there's going to be lots of people losing their jobs.
What could warm a person's heart?
Yeah.
Sorry, Leisha. I just want to say, what could warm a person's heart? What could warm a person's heart more than when a banker suggests that 100,000 working class blue and white collar workers need to lose their jobs for the sake of the economy and for the line and its trajectory? Like, it could be more disgusting, right?
Well, the RBA wants to get inflation down to about 2 to 3%, and that they say that's the way to do it. Yet at the same time, you have the government.
But we all know they won't, Lady Shallot. Like the rates of inflation they are putting up publicly are at best half what they really are. Unlike anyone who is paying energy bills and food bills knows that they are just lying, basically. The same as people in England are, by the way.
We're panicking at the moment because although we have relatively good income, basically it's all being eaten up by the hiking in the mortgage interest rates and cost of everything going up with inflation, and now these new labor taxes. we're literally getting all of our extra money that we're making is just getting fucking eaten up by all of this shit. So. If I was a normie, I would be looking at that voice bill vote. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Go away. Like, if we didn't have any savings, we'd be like, fuck, we're going to lose our house. So
no more expenses. More expenses.
Dawson should really be playing up that angle as well, saying, look, the average person out there is struggling, and you're trying to divide them further. That this is a complete slap in their face. Why aren't you doing something to help them rather than divide them further? I mean, they really need to sort of A/B test all these slogans, like, say vote no to racism, or vote no to division, or vote no to whatever. And because I think it's actually a really simple case to make to people.
I just think the best case would be from the right. They should turn around and say, if you want to lose Australia Day, vote yes to the voice, because you will within the year.
The only thing I want to say on that just briefly is that we suffer the same problem with incrementalism about that as we've seen on any other subject. Like, for instance, if you look at, say, polling data from like the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s, what their opinions were, say, on civil unions and non-traditional marriage, right? They were relatively low numbers. And then, once a couple of generations are churned through the education system and, they're dumped into the university and they're sort of, marinated before they're grilled and finished off, in higher academia and sent into the workforces, minions of the ideology, then those numbers end up spiking. And I think the problem is that, we can do that tactically now, but I'm just trying to think of, trying to think of the issue that's come up recently, and it's just escaped me. Actually, I just can't think of the because there's an instance that's just occurred recently that made me think of this idea. But there'll come a time where the majority of Australians will, like, assuming we continue down our present trajectory, who'll actually go, no, Australia Day is actually offensive. Australia Day is wrong, and yes, getting rid of it is a good idea. It's like so many of these progressive ideas. I'm trying to think what the words that Bob Hawke used when addressing the Fabian Society in 1984 or 6, whenever this famous speech was, and he used the terminology the inevitability of gradualness, and that sort of explains the Fabian methodology of incrementally bringing these things in bit by bit by bit, and so in the future, that's, like I said, it'll work now, but it probably won't work in 15 or 20 years' time. And that's like that for any issue. Like, we weren't asked about, mass migration, but it happened. And there'll come a time where they'll essentially, to take even Britain, for example, there'll come a point where in like a voting context, right? Let's assume that every sort of native Englishman wanted to change course. There's enough other votes to cancel them out, and the change can't happen. So that's something we need to be wary of going forward in the future. I hate to sort of blackpill, but it's just a point worth remembering.
That's true, but referenda are they're fairly discrete events, so they can legislate all sorts of other stuff. But I think, like with the Republic referendum, that was more than 20 years ago now, and they would like to revive that on the back of this. But that really scuppered that whole thing for a very long time. I think actually if they'd had a different model, they might have got through. But they really, I don't think it's the kind of thing necessarily where you can just have another one in 5 years. And yeah, look, the electorate in the future is probably going to be a lot more progressive than it is now. That said, we may have all these non-Anglos who would be less progressive, whether by inclination or just out of self-interest. But I think if this fails, they're not just going to be able to have another one next year or the year after or whatever. Particularly if they lose power and the Libs get in, although the Libs did bring in gay marriage, so maybe they would. But I think it would put this on the back burner for probably another generation. Who knows?
Yeah. I'm inclined to agree with you, Franklin.
It's a discrete event.
I think that Franklin's right about that. If we can defeat this, and I think we can, it will put it on the back burner for a bit. Like, it won't change any of the basic problems that the West has, that Australia totally shares with every other Anglo and Western country. But it will put things back, and it's worth doing that. Could I just ask, guys, I'd like to give us a little musical, how can I say this? A little musical thing in the middle of our stream, and then we can continue.
Interlude?
Afterwards. Yeah, an interlude. That's what I was looking for.
I'll go get myself a drink and come back.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to do a little musical interlude here, which I think is quite serious, but other people may not agree. Might take me a minute to get this off. I'm doing my boom attack again here, guys.
We'll get there in the end, I'm sure, Mr. Iron Duke.
Yeah, look, I'm not a boomer. I'm too young to be a boomer, slightly. But, my tech is not all that great. People want to come and give me advice on tech, they can. And the only reason I run an entropy stream is because I'm trying to get a better computer, because this one is crap. But anyway, there we go. All right, I'm nearly there.
Have we had the musical interlude?
Right.
Oh, I just went out. I don't know. I went out. I wasn't sure.
No, I'm just starting it. The fragment. It's coming now, as we speak.
Boomer tech.
Yeah, like I said, boomer tech.
You're a Gen Xer, though, aren't you?
I'm not really a boomer. I was born in 1965.
He's like 100 years old. Give him a break.
And which year? 1960.
1965. That's 25 years after World War II. I'm not.
So you're right on the cusp. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. I am right on the cusp.
Spiritual boomer.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So we've ascertained that the only people who are older in our circles are Shikobi Yakka and Binary Surfer. So. Sorry, I just beside you. I love the comment by Melon, by the way. My favorite part of a 99 Iron Duke stream is the sound of a drink being poured coming over the mic.
Is it a whiskey and Coke?
That's why I can't get this music happening.
Yeah, tremendously good Victorian internet. Duke's probably going to drop out of the stream again because the internet there is so bad.
Don't be rama, it's messing with your brain, say daily. Do you understand? You don't need petrol for a rocket. You put your petrol in the car it goes. Don't be rama, it's slipping up your nose. Don't be rama, don't be rama. Love your friends and protect your family. They are with you when you are lonely. Don't bandera. When you stop, your brains will be clear. Come on, yeah! Come on. We could the leaders of your darlings. You don't save petrol from our petrol. You make high stakes. Don't be rama, it's messing with your brain. Say daily. Do you understand? You don't need petrol for a rocket. You put the petrol in the car it goes. Don't be rama, it's sniffing up your nose. You not that lit, you rama. Gonna get caught like Dylan Osama. Yeah, I tell you, cause I can, I tell you. When you're smoking in the spirit, shit, the boys and girls are shifting to my kettle. Killing your brains. We could the leaders of your darlings. You don't save petrol from a can. You put the petrol in the high stakes. Don't be rama, it's messing with your brain. Say daily, do you understand? You don't save petrol from a can. You put the petrol in the car it goes. Don't be rama, slipping up your nose. Use your brains, think about your caution.
Vote no, Rama.
These guys are from Warburton. Is that Warburton, Victoria?
Guys, I don't know how much of. I have no I say Australian song about not sniffing petrol and instead putting in your car.
I'm gonna say to answer your question, Franklin, it could be Warburton, which I think is up in sort of like probably not far from where Bogan works, actually, in sort of a country WA.
Yeah,
it's right on the Gibson Desert.
Couldn't be Warburton in Victoria.
Gonna say that doesn't look nearly green enough to be Victoria.
I was thinking there aren't that many Aborigines out in Warburton.
It's not. I've been there. It's not there.
That's super white, that area.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't want to give our shall we say our opposites any ideas, but one thing I'm actually surprised I have not seen, like on television or even in the public sphere recently, is that, do you guys remember from the 90s that Yothu Yindi song?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm surprised I have not actually heard that once, because I remember, like, at primary school, whenever there was an opportunity for our more liberal minded teachers to they always played that song, always played the video clip, like back when we had VCRs at school. Yeah, I'm just surprised I haven't seen it, like, because it's such a hallmark for them, you know what I mean? Like, from a standpoint of
yeah. Getting the nostalgia going.
That's it.
They should play that Rama. Or I tell you what we should do. We should just get one of those trucks with a screen on it. Just drive around Box Hill.
Oh my God.
I don't know what are the Chinese areas of Sydney or whatever. Just drive around the most ethnic areas.
Imagine doing it through like Lakemba and like the eastern suburbs of Sydney, for God's sake.
You just get every Chinese person in Australia to vote no if you did that.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Oh,
so
wow.
These are the people who are going to be. Well, that's an interesting question. If this goes through and they get the these 24 people or whatever it is, are they going to be the? Well, we don't know, I guess. But what would people guess? Do you think they'll look like those guys, or will they be the sort of the people with blonde hair and blue eyes?
No, this is the huge disparity between what they think they're doing and what they're actually doing, which is that these representatives, especially at the national level, every single one of them is going to be at most 1/4 caste Aboriginal or 1/8 caste Aboriginal, and they're all going to come from upper middle class or upper class, cosmopolitan areas. These are the upper crust sort of people that are as Western as you can get. And I guarantee you not a single one of them has stepped foot into an actual, community in Alice Springs or Yarrabah or Arakoon or anywhere like that. Like, these people are just completely fucking detached from what they're actually trying to say they're representing. So,
yeah, I thought it would be that way. Well, one outcome might be, I expect that if this passes, that the percentage of people identifying as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander on the next census will go through the roof. It will. I mean, people respond to incentives, right? They'll.
Yep.
If this grants people special privileges, then you'll have Chinese Aborigines. You'll have everything. Vietnamese Aborigines, whatever. You'll have all these different people who all of a sudden.
My great grandma was Aboriginal, so
I was going to say that it's possible that there could be a crossbreed of Chinese and Aboriginal, but then I realized that the Chinese are extremely ethnocentric, and that's probably not possible because there were Chinese around in the Gold Rush era. People probably don't know.
Chinese are pretty racist, to be fair.
They're extremely racist.
Really. Yeah.
There's that infamous advert for detergent from China.
We got to stop using that word racist. We got to use what it actually is, which is normal.
Yeah, like in group preference, preference,
normal in-group preference, healthy in-group preference. Yeah,
guys, I am sorry. By the way, did you guys actually get the Rama tune?
We did, and it was amazing.
Good.
Lydia Thorpe, don't be Rama.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone said in the chat, I noticed when it was going on, that the next one would be "Don't fall asleep on the road." And you know what? It's the God's honest truth that when I was in the Northern Territory in 2001, there were adverts on the TV saying "Don't fall asleep on the tarmac road," because the tarmac road would get warmed up all during the day because it's subtropical. Or actually, it's tropical up there. And so these Aboriginal guys would fall asleep on the road and then would be surprised when they were turned into, like, I don't know, whatever you're turned into when a free truck road train runs over you that can't stop. So they used to have these adverts with an Aboriginal policeman saying, "Don't fall asleep on the road." Serious, they did.
I thought you were going to say that you accidentally hit the accelerator instead of the brake.
No, mate. The only thing I got, my girl, my late wife, slagged me off because there were a load of finches on one side of the road, and I once slammed us over to the right a bit, and then my right wheels picked up. So I didn't run them over. And she said, "You almost killed us!" Being a woman and like exaggerating hugely. But, you know.
Why were you in the Northern Territory?
We used to live in we used to live on what's it called? In between.
Uh-oh.
Wow.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we've lost him now.
Yeah, Victorian Wi-Fi strikes again.
Oh, man.
Either that or Dan Andrews, just like press the red button.
Yeah, that's it. You've gone.
I should let people know there's a few people saying that there should be a Gard rendition of Rama Rama. No, not possible. I'll get kicked off YouTube if I do that.
I was gonna say, could we have Gardarama instead?
Mr. Bogan says, I have unironically bunged my bull bar before. That is the origin of the word.
There goes Mr. Iron Juice monetization.
He's off. Hey, I said bunged.
It's
a verb. Past verb. Yeah. Past tense verb.
Mm-hmm. Oof. But
anyway, what's Karen?
Sorry, go Gard.
No, go.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that we've referenced Box Hill several times, and it is amazing how there are entire sort of segments of our cities now that are simply not in any way discernibly Australian, and that different subgroups, shall I say, that have come to Australia, particularly in recent decades, who it is interesting what the distinction will be between those who feel a sense of empathy towards the native Australians, the Aboriginal people, and then those who would feel as if passing the voice would actually inhibit on their own rights as a minority group themselves. And I have no idea how it's really going to play out, but it is actually an interesting point that Franklin raised much earlier in this stream. And I've sort of been mulling on it, and I sort of do wonder how the chips are going to fall. And because let's face it, the thing with, say, for instance, Chinese, they're largely ethnocentric. But the other thing is too, because as a group as well, that will and have a history a lot like Italians actually of moving to countries and sort of creating like their own Chinatown or something, or Little Italy, whatever, and they sort of they have their businesses and they sort of create their own commercial, economic, cultural hubs. Hence sort of second, third generation sometimes will skew liberal depending on where in a city they live or what their disposition is. I don't know. I just think it's a really interesting question how that will eventually play out.
I mean, historically, incoming groups have never had any empathy for Indigenous people. They just come in and trample all over them. They've never cared for them.
Well, the problem with these groups is what's happening is that they have these community leaders who run these organizations, and they're part of these Australian multicultural organizations. And those guys are really left wing, and they're getting their marching orders. And then those guys go out to their local communities and convince the locals. So that's why I think they're up for grabs. And I think we should have someone trying to do that. It needs to be someone within their communities. We need to find those based Chinamen and based Indians or what have you, and get them out there campaigning for no, because they're just, they're not going to look at some white guy walking around trying to talk to them in English. But if you get one of the locals doing it.
You may be right. I think we're going to be seeing a drastic increase in the population. We're definitely going to be seeing a drastic increase in the population of Indians because of this new immigration deal made with Modi. But I think because of this potential major decoupling with China, we're going to get a lot of Chinese dissidents move here, even more so than before. So I think you're onto something there. We should appealing to the Chinese base.
Yeah, you're just leaving stuff on the table. You're leaving money on the table.
Guys, I would just say that average white Australians, average Anglo-Celtic Australians have always had quite a lot of sympathy with Aboriginals. That's why there are so many of them still around. The average white Australian flings millions of dollars at Aboriginal Australians every single year, and it does no good whatsoever.
Yes.
But they still sling that millions of dollars at them.
It can be plausibly argued too that it's detrimental to them as well, Iron Duke, just on that note.
Yep, for sure. I'm not denying that, Furious. All I'm saying is that the average Anglo-Celtic and other white Australians are not anti-Aboriginal at all and never have been. That's why they're still around.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot to unpack there for people, and you're not going to do that in a 5-minute conversation at a voting booth with people. I think that's the wrong angle for this. I think you have to play up the liberalism and the whole, well, they're trying to divide us. And they're trying to give someone something at someone else's expense.
I think you're right, the Franklin, I do. But as always, you are more cynical than I, which is fair enough. But the truth is, the average Anglo white Australian is not particularly anti-Aboriginal and is even vaguely pro-Aboriginal. But the idea that they should run the country in front of everyone else is a totally different idea.
Yeah, people. I think it's actually a very easy sell to people to say nobody should get anything special. And I mean, look, we all think that the founding stock should get something special, but that nobody's going to buy into that. But according to liberalism, it's very easy to make the case, well, nobody should get anything special, and we're meant to have this multi-culti paradise. Why are they stirring all this division? I think that's a very simple argument to put to
what
people.
you're invoking there is the sort of classic Australian fair go sort of attitude, which is going to die. Which is going to die with the last cohort of true Australians. Like this new set of new cohort of people. They believe wholeheartedly in
the fair suck of the sauce bottle, mate.
For positive rights for marginal groups, which is everyone keeps going on about what's the definition of woke, and I think that's literally what the definition of woke is, which is positive rights for perceived marginal groups, and that's all this is, and all they're going to do, if this will, as I say, they'll probably push it through the back door. But if they vote no and they perhaps sit on it for a while, I think they're just going to wait out until the boomers die.
Yeah, but the irony of that is that as Australia becomes less white, there might be fewer people willing to vote yes for Aborigines to get special rights.
True.
Because if Australia becomes majority non-white, all these people are going to say, well, screw this, and I'm not a minority anymore. If Indians one day, and they probably will, end up as more than 50% of the population, they're not going to be a minority, and they're not going to see themselves as a minority anymore. So if anything, it may be that maybe not white boomers, but probably when white millennials are in their old age and they're the minority in this country, liberalism may go out with them.
Oh, great! So we just got to wait for demographic to get what we want.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, but you won't get what you want, Chris.
No, we've got this sweet spot
because then the Indians and Chinese will be in charge.
Yes.
So
that's
it'll be even worse.
Yeah, we'll have our own Rishi Sunak and our own Suella Braverman. It'll be great. The base Bravermans will crush the indigenous.
I think we've got
They're not managing very well in England, are they?
Sorry, what were you saying, Franklin?
But we've got this little sweet spot where we've still got enough boomers and Xers around to believe in liberalism and equality and multiculti and all of the rest of it, that they could see this as a threat to that. Once the boomers die off, then white people are going to be significantly more progressive. And then eventually there'll be more non-whites who won't be progressive. But that will create its own reaction in those progressive white people as well. But I think there's a window of opportunity here. I mean, if they'd been sensible with all of this, but of course they're being pushed by their far left, they would have just waited another 10 years and they would have got through in a landslide. But they couldn't wait. Yeah.
Well, let's hope they fail this time. which I think will be good for us. I mean, I think you're right, the Franklin. In the long term, actually, no. So in the medium term, we're not going to win. In the long term, we will win, because in the long term, people want the right to their own land. So in the long term, I think we might win. Just depends how many immigrants arrive in Australia, I guess, and in Britain, and in Canada and New Zealand and what.
Well, this is the thing. There's basically two time, stopwatches going at once. And on one hand, you've got how quickly are the bio-Leninists losing control of the mechanisms that their predecessors built that they simply don't understand and can't control, and by their ineptitude, how rapidly are they, sort of throwing the wheels off their mechanism, so to speak, because let's face it, there's also this aspect, Franklin just touched on it, and you could say the same thing too, that for them, from the progressive left standpoint, like their pursuit of, say, they call marriage equality, right, was a very, very long game situation. You got to think like Stonewall happened in what, like the 70s or something, in the USA.
Gay people marrying, which like basically makes Christian marriage a joke.
Exactly. And that was a 40-year ball game that they played ideologically and politically and culturally, right? You got to think, like, we went through like a decade and a half of like will and grace to like sort of soften the population up to like accept the idea of it, right? And then eventually, it's a couple of states in America, or it's, Slovakia, or it's, this country, that country, and then it sort of creates this domino effect of, what you call manufactured consent, right? And then rather than waiting maybe 20 or 30 years for the tea question, I don't want to, incur Susan's wrath here, but the whole transsexual thing then just immediately came afterwards. There was no patience. Once they got what they wanted, it was literally what is the next group, and rather than playing the long game of another couple of decades, boom, they went straight to the next rung immediately, which is actually ended up repulsing people.
Furious, and we all know their next aim is like.
Oh, beyond that,
kids.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
and then
next thing.
Exactly, because liberation for them has no limit, right? It's the perpetual revolution, right? As conceived of by the the founders of Bolshevik ideology. And I guess going back to the stopwatch is basically you've got that phenomena on one side, right? Like, are they going to lose control of this machine, and how quickly? Through ineptitude and through greed, through blindness, through myopia. And then on the other hand, it's like, if and when systems as we understand them no longer work, and there is something of a catastrophe that we're going to have to endure, are there enough people like us that are like-minded, and are we, in strong enough communities, and are we in sufficient contact, and do we possess sufficient resources that we might actually be, like that sort of resurgence of empires lost, like. I mentioned the Bronze Age earlier in the stream. A lot of people don't realize that the Greeks had an alphabet which was pre-Greek, right, called Linear B. Now, after the Bronze Age collapse, Linear B vanishes in mainland Greece and the Aegean for about 500 years. Like they just don't write their letters. But then there's a renewal of what we understand as what we call archaic Greek, which then 550 years later, and that is the language of Homer, right? It's and it's the father of the language that is used then by people like Herodotus and Thucydides, and these sort of characters who sort of are the fathers of Greek history, as we understand of classical Greek history. Are we going to wait 500 years? I have no idea. Like, this lies in the future. We could all be hugely wrong about this, but the point that I'm making is that if there is a dark age of sorts to come, we just have to ensure that ourselves and our successors can and will make it, I suppose. And they're the two stopwatches that I feel are sort of ticking at any given time.
But the problem for the left, as I see it, is the fragility of their worldview. They have to have everything now, and as you say, when they get it, they have to go straight to the next thing, and they have to hold on to it, and that's why they're so passionate about it. Whereas the worldview that we hold is eternal. We can hold on to these ideas forever because what we believe is true, and what they believe is false. I mean, how long can you hold a position in society that's pro pedophilia before that society falls apart? Whereas what we have no matter how long we have to wait it out, what we have is real and true, and what they have isn't. I mean, their worldview is so fragile. That's why leftists are so passionate about what they believe and so, demonic in the way they go about it, because they have to hold on to it so tightly.
Also, just to buttress you very quickly, lady, you think also why are they obsessed with like these, these WEF people, and why are they obsessed with all of their diktats and all of their, so-called trust the science kind of mentalities about this, is that they have to adhere, they have to implement this therapeutic, technocratic, technical, automated, computerized, almost you call it a transhuman state, where we just sort of expend eternity in the coon pod, and we don't have any kind of self-sovereignty, no kind of humanity.
Furius, you're
end
a
us.
huge, you're a huge scholar and fan of the ancient world, with the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans and this stuff. And I know for a fact that Lady Shallot is a big deal on the Anglo-Saxons and the Celts and all that stuff in history. And so I think both of you are right. And in the long term, our view is absolutely right.
Yeah.
And all these bloody soy boys and feminists and LGBTQXYZ twats are absolutely wrong. But I think we're going to go through a period where we're losing and they're winning. And I mean, in fact, that's already started.
Yeah, I mean, I think that 100 years from now, they're not going to be any white liberals. They're not going to be any liberals. I'm using that in the sort of international sense.
Well said.
And things are going to get worse before they get better. But I actually think things are accelerating to the point where once upon a time I would have thought that a lot of problems would begin to emerge in the 2030s. I think due to the combination of the sort of accelerating decline within the West, which Furius has just laid out, but also because of what's happening on the international scene, I don't think people in Western countries are going to be able to have these sort of ideological luxuries for very much longer. Actually, I think a lot of things are going to come to a head before the end of this decade, and we're just not going to have the prosperity to put up with these things. Now, in the short term, they will probably try to deal with the kulaks as sort of an anti-revolutionary force. It'll be their fault that this utopia won't be realized. Yeah. But that's my concern. But I think that actually this will be sorted out within a couple of decades.
I think you're right, Franklin, because I mean, if you know anything about Jonathan Haidt, I'm sure a lot of you do, about moral foundations theory and about the fact that the progressive leftists really only have two moral foundations, which is oppression and what was the other one? Care harm. So so they ratchet those up to 11 at all instances when they become politically active. But they were perfect tools for what the technocratic sort of regime wanted, which was they're banking on their fervor and they were banking on their enthusiasm, using oppression and minorities and all this sort of shit as a platform for it. But ultimately, it was just a tool that's served its purpose and now it's burning out. So I think you're right, and it'll sort of go back into a technocratic Blairite style sort of pragmatism.
Yeah, but even then, I think that Australia is going to be in a world of hurt a decade from now. Like we'll go through a recession, but we'll never get. I mean, I think this really began with COVID, actually, and we can say that the world pre-COVID was completely different, and that's never coming back. A lot of people have never recovered economically from that.
100%. The fact
and it's just going to be
so many people don't see that.
More and more are seeing it though, and we're going to go through that over the next decade to the point where this country is going to be significantly worse off. And I think that will create a reaction in that people just won't have tolerance for this bullshit. They just won't be able to deal with it because they will really be struggling just to pay the bills.
Looking at this from an outsider's perspective, because I'm not Baltimore, right? I've lived in Australia 23 years, but when I arrived here 23 years ago, Australia was still kind of like a working class paradise in many respects. It really was. Like, I arrived there and thought, oh my God, my dad would have loved this country. Why on earth didn't he move here, etc. And the reason I arrived there is because I met an Australian, very cute girl in South Africa. But when I arrived, I just thought, yeah, Australia was a working class paradise, but it was also to some degree more than that. Like, it really was the lucky country that they used to talk about in many respects. But that is so not true anymore. It just isn't. Like, look at the house prices. Look at the cost of living. That people come to Australia as visitors and say how bloody expensive it is, which it is. You know?
It is.
Yeah. Frankly, I think you'd have some good takes on this, but because you've been overseas quite often. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Australia has transformed beyond recognition compared to when I was a young adult, let alone when I was a child. It's a great big mess now, and a lot of people are struggling and are falling through the cracks. And I think that a decade from now, this is not just a temporary thing. And we were sort of told, oh, well, it's the pandemic or whatever. Well, now we've got all this inflation and geopolitics is changing. The West is not going to be as powerful as it once was. And that's going to translate into domestic issues and standard of living. And we're bringing in tons and tons of people. This place is going to be a complete disaster. And I think that's going to make it harder and harder for people to believe in liberal delusions and to think that those are the most pressing issues. Things are going to get worse. And as I said, part of the reaction will be that, well, the utopia hasn't emerged because of these kulaks. We need to deal with them.
Yeah.
Anti-revolutionary forces, whatever.
Yeah.
These white supremacists or whatever.
Be
blah, blah, blah.
Be a smallholder or a farmer or someone who runs a small business, and they will be up your rear end so quick.
At the same time, they will see a massive increase in the black market. I think we have tougher times ahead, but I think that things are accelerating now, both within the West and outside of the West. I mean, I think this war has really accelerated a lot of global trends. I think it's brought a lot of things forward a decade at least. So, these are the things that I might have had to deal with when I was really old, but I might still be relatively young when they come to a head.
The one thing, if I might touch on it, because I sadly, my grandfather's now be gone, a fair while now. I mean, I'm trying to think 15 years or so. But I remember, he would talk, and I mean, again, a lot like these sort of post-war pioneers who came over, and I mean, not all of them were good apples. There were obviously some, but that's the case. That always happens, no matter where or in what genre you're talking. But, a lot of people will rightly say, you guys will probably agree, that a lot of the Europeans that came post-war have contributed to this country quite extensively. And the thing is,
hang on, Furius. I can't allow this. I've got to say that there are lots of really pretty Italian and Greek girls in Australia. So yeah, there are. Yes, there are.
Indeed, but and we like our Australian, as in Anglo-Celtic compatriots, were prepared to go out to the country, and we cleared land, and we made vast swaths of this landmass productive, and we grew our crops and we grew our vegetables and do the things that meds like to do, and like we to a point. I would hope that we lived up to that in a very authentic sense. But what I find saddening, and I remember my grandfather talking this as one of those kind of men who did that, where they would say, yes, Australia has a lot going for it, but that's actually its problem, is that continental Europeans especially, because you got to think this is also in part, and I mean no disrespect to the British tradition, is that once the Royal Navy was established, to some degree, obviously the British Empire and Britain as a landmass depended on the Royal Navy for its protection from the continent. But in many ways, the Channel was its greatest defense along with its navy, whilst the continent of Europe squabbled, for centuries, the 7 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the Spanish Succession, the Napoleonic Wars, you can go on.
If we could have avoided 1914, Furius, I think Britain would have had a vastly superior future.
I think that's true for I think you could say the French and the Germans and a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, but I don't
definitely
care
the Russians
about them.
as well.
I'm an Anglo,
No. Granted. but the point I'm making is that Europe had a very not a very different existence, but had an existence that was different from Britain. So
Britain could
this
have
mentality
relied on a Royal Navy in 1914 and could have just said, "Look, we're going to have armed neutrality. If a German fleet comes into the Channel, we'll sink it. But otherwise than that, we're not getting involved." That, to me, would have been the sensible British option in August 1914.
I don't disagree at all. In fact, I would largely agree with that perspective. The point I'm trying to make is that I think there's something to that existence, right? You got to think this. You're talking like post 100 Years' War, where the British aren't really, commanding armies in Europe and tussling with European powers, right? In that there's this psychology of sort of the wars out there somewhere. It's on a distant frontier. It's on the seas. It's it's in the Americas. It's in Canada. It's blah 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 blah, right? And so people of that mentality settled Australia and founded Australia and federated Australia, and then Australia is that phenomena times 10, times 100. This entire island is girt by sea. And I mean, you got to think Indonesia, is only kind of now somewhat arising as a rival entity geopolitically and strategically speaking, right? Australia hasn't had enemies. You got to think in the time that, you mentioned 1914, we have, hundreds of divisions of Germans, of French, of the BEF was there, but not on British soil, of British, of Italians,
Totally
Greeks and Russians, tearing each other apart. And they know the pain.
Reason for any Australian soldiers to die fighting Germans or Turks or anyone else. Britain should just have said, "We're neutral in this war. I don't care."
Indeed. But that's not what I'm cleaving to. My point is that all these other countries, and in World War I includes the Ottomans as well, they've torn each other apart. They have suffered the pain of troops on their soil. They have felt bombs and artillery shatter their soil, and they have, they have seen the worst of it. And I mean, I think we might have touched on this on another stream, mind you, like my grandmother being essentially an eyewitness of the Italian campaign in World War II, and just sort of seeing waves and waves of British American bombers bombing everything of value that exists on the Italian peninsula, which was a strategic value. And that's what happens in war. Complaining about it, I'm just saying it happens in war. The Australian people have not endured that to any great degree. Yes, I know Darwin was bombed. Yes, I know Broome was bombed.
Yeah, it's not very much though. Yeah,
but it's not the same
Torres Strait
thing.
Islands were frequently bombed.
Australia's almost,
and so sorry, Frank. I'll just finish. I just want to say, and that's created what I call a Galapagos syndrome, and Australians seem to perceive no risk within their country or externally. And I think that makes Australians, not people like us, but Australians, normie Australians, and particularly liberal-minded Australians, as in little L liberal, progressive Australians, very vulnerable, more so than most. Sorry,
I would just say that the Australians in World War II were the first guys to beat the Axis on land at the Siege of Tobruk. And they were also the first Allied guys to beat the Imperial Japanese Army on land in New Guinea. So I would say that, which is absolutely fair and true of the Australians. But yes.
And back then they were very brave and good fighting.
Yeah, back then. These are not the same Australian soldiers as today, any more than they were the same British soldiers today.
But even then, I think Furius is correct. These were wars elsewhere. It's very different fighting and dying somewhere else than seeing your home get torn apart. And
Yes.
I think Australia almost has this kind of childlike innocence in this regard. Probably Australia and New Zealand, I think they might be the only two countries on the planet that have never had this kind of thing. And there is a kind of childlike innocence. We're yet to become mature countries, if you like, because we haven't been invaded, because we haven't seen things torn up here. Also because our entire history has been on the right side of history, in that we were sort of born into the post-Enlightenment way of doing things. We federated. We didn't have to have a war of independence or anything like that. We federated. It was all very civilized, and we came to a place that was basically empty and built civilization from nothing. And we've always been on the winning side of every war. So we've had this sort of Peter Pan syndrome, in a sense, that we've never had to take a big L. Like, lots of countries have been occupied for, in many cases, centuries even. We've never even had anything remotely like that. We've never had to take a big L. I mean, Vietnam doesn't really count, but in all of the big things, we've been on the right side. First the British Empire, and then the GAE, the GAE. And we are extremely naive about history. We're almost kind of ahistorical, actually. We're sort of like Fukuyama's Man at the End of History. We really do think that, because it's like we were born into the end of history, and we've always lived in the end of history. And other places, because they've been under someone else's thumb, because they've had the shit kicked out of them, blah, 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 they understand that there is a thing called history, and it has its ups and downs, and it's nasty. But we've never had that. We've always been the winners. So it's easy for us to buy into that.
No, I would just say, look, Vingor says in the chat, don't make me do eternal Anglo memes in chat. But I would say, in response to Vingor, that Rommel, Field Marshal Rommel of the Wehrmacht, the Africa Corps, he turned around and said, if I had to take hell, I would use the Australians to take it and the New Zealanders to hold it. So,
he did say that.
He did.
So, I mean, no one's arguing that the Australians...
They were damn good soldiers back in the day. But bear in mind, any of these diggers today would think that all of our politicians today were complete shit-lips. And
they would, them. But they would, and yet we didn't just get here. This hasn't just happened overnight. It's like, look at architecture.
No, it's been gradual. It's been gradual. Yeah.
All of these things happened on their watch as well. I mean, it's not. I think people often think everything began with the baby boomers, but a lot of the things that went wrong happened with those generations that fought in the war. So they were really based, and they defeated the Japanese or whatever, and then they came back and voted for stupid things after the war. So I think it's because we're victims of our own success. We have been able to run this very successful high trust society, and that has allowed us to think that, well, to use an Australian phrase, that our shit doesn't stink. That we really have got everything figured out in this country, and obviously everything works really well here, so we can do no wrong.
And Franklin, if it doesn't work out well, or if it doesn't quite go to plan, she'll be right, mate. And the problem is she ain't right now, and she hasn't actually been right for a rather long time, as a matter of fact.
100%, both of you. Furious, the Franklin, I agree with you totally. Look, I love the Australian optimism of she'll be right, mate, but I think we're getting out of that era now.
On that note, I want to run it past you guys, because it's a theory that has bounced around in my head for several years now, and I actually wonder if, because I even remember, like, in political discourse, up until, say, the early part of, not the 2020s, but say like the early 2010s, right, where they'll say there are parts of Queensland, Brisbane aside, that are still very conservative, quite right wing. WA is a largely conservative state.
Queensland
South
was known as a conservative state. Absolutely,
I mean,
it was.
Queensland produced one of the greatest Australians ever, Joe Bjelke-Peterson.
100%.
You're going to mention him.
And they produced the Catters. Like, they've magnificent Australias. Yeah, and so, and you could say the same about, rural New South Wales, like parts of, like New England, or, places like Wagga Wagga. I mean, they're proper die-the-wool, parts of this country,
Rural Australia, Furious, is still pretty right-wing. But rural Australia doesn't count as shit for the enormous cities that we have.
Well, yeah, I was going to say they've been offset by the tremendous growth of the cities and the urbanization. And also, I am of the feeling that, and just as a side point, the generation that are sort of adults now are probably the last generation of properly conservative rural Australians, because the thing is, A, they're being gutted, and B, they send their kids to boarding school, and what happens at boarding school? Well, they get zogged anyway. They get propagandized and whatever, and they get sent home, and they castigate their parents about being xenophobes and racist right wingers with privilege. So that's kind of going to go the wayside too. The point I'm trying to make is that up until that period of time, there were segments of Australian society they could say were genuinely this way. However, I think for a long time, that mentality of she'll be right, made Australians to a point hard to propagandize, because they just didn't actually care. They were indifferent to a lot of things, or they would just go about their day and not fuss. Like, say, for example, there's segments of American society that have always been sort of a bit antagonistic, have always been a little bit politically radical and active. And you could say the same thing with like the British Union movement, and bits and pieces around the world. You could say the same of the French radicals, or like in Italy, it's sort of apparent as well. Very true in Germany. And in those two latter cases, you had a strong left and a strong right as well. Australia never had particularly a culture of this. And so that indifferent, I think, for a long time made Australians relatively impervious. But the problem is once they got the kids, once they got the apparatchiks in the schools, in the universities, in the academia, in the media, running the ABC, etc., that should be right went from a safeguard to a problem, because about being indifferent about people being indifferent about these agendas safeguarded them to a point until they lost their kids, until they lost their grandkids who got propagandized and who didn't have the same mentality. They didn't have the same approach to life. And as such, we've had actually a very rapid reversal in, say, 25, 30 years, probably the lifespan of, say, like myself or Franklin or Gard or whatever, like occurred really in our life, where that apathy and that sort of blasé attitude has been the hindrance that's allowed them to be.
That she'll be right. We talked about this with Lady Shallot, and I think
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So my conception of she'll be right, which I think is the correct one, was initially it was basically the form of the hard Australian stoicism. Which was appropriate, was completely era appropriate. Not era appropriate now, because there is no. This isn't based in stoicism. It is literally just like complete ignorance and blasé, as you say.
But back in the day,
I get parents saying to me all the time when their children suddenly announce they're transgender or whatever. They say to me, "Where the hell did this come from?" And I have to say. But I have to say to them, well, what life lessons did you pass down to your children? Because if you don't, if you don't give them good life lessons, somebody else will give them bad ones. So this apathy has led us to this, because if you don't take 100%. A bloody interest, somebody else will. And that's
and that's ultimately what's got Australians, sadly.
You're right. Lady Shallot, you are right. I would just say to Chris Seymour in the chat, who says, and I presume he's talking about the Australian she'll be right, mate. It's like the Shire, only with more swearing and a lot higher. I absolutely think that is true. I think that is absolutely where it originally in the 19th century came from. But we're in such a different position today. It's unbelievable.
I'm going to push back a bit on the idea that rural areas are super based, because I see tons of. I mean, there's a massive amount of social degeneracy in rural areas. There's a massive amount of people who have just sort of imbibed the mainstream. These television, these reality TV shows where they get some bunch of tatted up slags and they they marry them off at first sight, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
There's tons of that kind of culture out here. There's and all these what do they call them, broken and blended families and all of that sort of stuff. All is not well. I mean, I think actually that, and this is in line with the research that Charles Murray has done in the US. The people going to church, the people who are married when they have kids, blah blah blah, all of those things, they're in the upper middle class, and they're actually probably in wealthy suburbs in Melbourne.
Yes.
Ironically, they're not out here where I live. There are tons and tons of people out here who are as big as a house, covered in tats.
Yep.
They've got kids from 3 different relationships. Blah blah blah. It's actually
these
always
rural
not
areas. These rural areas are suffering massively.
We're all losing, guys. Look,
they're suffering from major moral, social decay from like methamphetamine, and just anecdotally, like if I go into these smaller towns, sort of south of Tully or anywhere like that, where it's around cane farms and cane mills, where they have the new cohort. When they have the new cohort, which is like the sort of 18 to 20-year-olds, which are now working age. These are the kids of the ostensibly conservative, rural people, but that, like, as you say, that they're not, I don't even think they're even political. Like, they may believe what they're told on the telly, but these people are, 18, they smoke, they drink, they do drugs, even though they're supposedly based in their country kids. They're just as morally vacuous as anyone that lives in a city of that age. Yeah.
And I just want to say, Frank, because you raised a point, I actually do agree with you. And I think it's actually a phenomenon. When we talk, when we listen about politics in, say, about America, the USA, and they talk about like, this is like Appalachia and the Rust Belt, and, places that were formerly prosperous, that have just been degenerated as a result of economics and to some degree also this spiritual degradation, which have happened simultaneously or in conjunction with each other. And then as a result, we have this, the drug abuse, we have the depression, we have the suicide rates. I think that's actually also kind of what's happened in our regional areas. And I think that's played out in what both yourself and Gard have been describing here. And so I think, in that sense, it's undeniable that's happened. But again, that's to the advantage of the regime. Like if their own sort of class enemies and their own political opponents are degenerating themselves, well, that's a self-perpetuating goal, isn't it, of sorts, a self-perpetuating W.
Look, guys, I would just say absolutely there is a downturn even in the rural people in Australia, and that's true also in Britain and in Canada and in New Zealand. There is absolutely a downturn in the rural people in those areas. But if we totally lose faith with all those guys, what the hell can we hang on to?
I don't think it's a matter of losing faith.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of being realistic and not looking at all of this through rose-colored glasses. Another interesting phenomenon that I've noticed is that supposedly on the conservative side of politics, it's actually often the Liberal Party members in the outer suburbs who are far more based than Nationals members, for instance. There are some Nationals members who are based, but a lot of Nationals members are actually pretty kind of wet. And it's someone like Peter Dutton, for instance. He's in suburban Brisbane, essentially. He's not out in the sticks. So I think even the sort of the political representation is misleading, because people can look at a particular electorate and say, oh, well, on a two-party preferred basis, they're extremely right-wing, and yet both in their lifestyles and in the people they choose to represent them, they're not, actually.
I just have to say, Chris Seymour with, I believe it's a quote from Sophocles, they're still our people. The strong will endure what they can, and the weak will suffer what they must. And that is one of the great lessons of history that agitates the liberal mind, is that they think that material, being able to fulfill material needs, quenches the concerns of people and will fulfill them in every conceivable way. And it's just not true. And actually, life is a struggle. And it's not just a struggle between civilizations or cultures or nations. It's actually, to some degree, a struggle within those cultures and civilizations. And that through these great cycles, people like Carlyle or Toynbee or to some degree even Evola speak of, right? They're not only eras whereby entire cultures and nations and civilizations are put through the sieve and the chaff is separated from the wheat, so to speak. That even occurs at the personal level, at the individual level. There are simply people who will not make it. There'll be whole groups of people who won't make it through terrible circumstances, and there'll be those who do. And I think, again, that's like if you take another thing from this video or from this stream, also consider that, because it's a message as old as time, and there are innumerable people, innumerable countries, innumerable cultures that have gone through that. Some have survived, and a great many haven't.
That last part of your quote, wasn't that Thucydides from the Melian Dialogue?
No, you're right. It is Thucydides. I don't know why I said Sophocles. Yeah, Thucydides. You're right. Yep. Thank you for that correction, Franklin.
Furius,
I had a feeling it had the summary of the
Furius
Peloponnese
reads
War.
so much ancient Greek and ancient Roman that he gets confused. But yeah, which is fair enough, because
I'll be reading my Seneca these days.
Oh man, I love the ancient Romans, to be honest. I really do. Look, guys, we've gone on for a long time on this stream. I want to do two things before we finish. First of all, what would you vote in this referendum? I will say absolutely vote no. What would you other guys say?
Vote yes. Let's just collapse it. Vote no.
Acceleration.
Other question actually on this. So if people vote informal, whether intentionally or not, how does that affect the vote?
Who knows?
To get over the line, do they need to get 50% plus one of the total votes, or just the valid votes?
I just say vote no. That would be my.
Well, yeah, no. I'm just wondering how that shakes out in this kind of situation.
I don't think they've actually made that very clear, have they?
Because normally it doesn't matter, right? But if you need to get, I assume it's just formal votes. So I assume
if it is just formal votes, I'd say you've got to vote no. If you're
yeah, that's right.
Patriotic Australian, vote no. Sorry,
but what I'm saying is, say there are 100 people, and 10 of them vote informal. Does it need 46 people to pass, or does it still need 51 people to pass?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It's they could fiddle it for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, obviously no. I don't like voting for politicians, but I think when we have referenda, it's a whole other kettle of fish.
Yep. No, look, I'd absolutely say vote no.
There is the issue of sort of manufactured consent, I guess. If you vote, then in some sense you give consent to the outcome.
Yeah.
If it turns out to be yes. That's why they do it here. There's that whole story about how it was brought in originally because it split the vote between conservatives in the 1920s or whatever. But the reason why they maintain it, I think, is because it manufactures consent. They can turn around and say to everyone, well, you voted for this. You played the game, so you have to accept the result.
Yeah, they sure hate referendums in England. That's for certain.
There'll never be another one.
I don't think there will.
Not after 2016.
Nope. When we voted to leave the
I remember it well.
Union, there'll never be another one in England.
Yeah.
They hate it. They absolutely hate it. And all the Conservative Party under the Indian banker Rishi Sunak, is working as hard as he can, the little nasty bitch man, to destroy it. But, yeah.
Oh, the elites have never forgiven us for 2016. They'll never forgive it, and never forget it either.
Nope, I agree.
It's only strengthened their resolve to punish us, essentially, you might say.
Oh yeah, 100% Furious for sure. Chris, would you vote yes or no to the Voice to Parliament?
I'll vote no.
I'm only joking.
But it's not going to make any difference anyway. They're going to be doing it through the back door. So
I agree, but I still think we should vote no.
I mean,
that's
for
right.
me,
If you push the people enough, they'll rise up, eh?
I hope.
That is an aside, which is indeed a factor of consideration. I have to say, even though sometimes it's over minutiae, and like you say, God, they'll find a way to ram this through the back door one way or another, or it's this way or it's that way. We know how these things work. None of us here are under any illusions, right? But I have to say that sometimes, and we saw it with Brexit, we saw it with Trump. To some degree, even in our own little way, I think we saw it with Morrison when he won, the previous federal election. And I have to say that I hate to sound like a bit of a Paul Murray here, and I'm fired up right now, but I do love seeing the establishment left-wing media absolutely cope and seethe and dilate. And if vote no happens, even though they're going to brand us all the nasty words, I just want to see. I want to see the hosts of ABC News and the BBC just absolutely piss themselves and be just and mad. And
you know that at least two of the news anchors are going to cry.
They're going to cry and they're going to sob and they're going to whine. They're going to talk about privilege and whatever. And I'm just going to open up. I'm going to open up a bottle of red wine. And I'm just going to savor. I'm going to Chad yes the TV screen the entire night.
Salt mining. You'll open Australia's biggest salt mine.
100%, man. Full well they're going to go on about racist white Australians, and I so hope that happens. I would love to see racist white Australians being the headline, because good Australians kind of are, like all good people in the entire world of all races.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the face of the AFL and the NRL who decided that it's their business to tell us how we should think. And they had that Aboriginal weekend in the Aussie Rules a few weeks ago, and that was just total cringe. You just think, oh, please, just God, I just can't wait. It would be great. It would be great.
So absolutely 100% agree with Furious on this. If we can get the no to win, this will be so cool. The sheer cringe of the lefty liberals will be so great.
Indeed, Mr. Eindruck.
All right, friends, I must depart. I've reached
all right, before you do, Chris, please plug something for yourself.
Just go to my YouTube channel. You can see all the musical renditions I've done of poetry there, and also my latest hit, the banger Rocky Road to Dublin. It's one of my favorite songs, and it's great fun covering it. And you can also follow me on Twitter, just my name. I'll have lots of obnoxious Australian hot takes there. Good fun. But and it's been great talking to you guys. This is a really good panel. Very much enjoyed it. And farewell to the chat. Farewell to all. And have a good night.
Too right, God. Take care, mate.
Yeah, go and check out Chris Gard. Great traditional right of center music channel, and a musician who is not a poofter, which is most unusual these days. But true. Who else wants to get off next? Lady of Shallot.
Yeah, I'll leave.
Okay, Frank. It doesn't matter. I'm not trying to push people off.
No, I need to go.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Franklin, please do some shilling for your channel, which is one of the best Australian channels on YouTube.
I'll be doing my monthly stream, not this Sunday, but the following Sunday at 11 a.m., whatever it is, Australian Eastern Time or whatever it's called here in Victoria. And hopefully I'll do another love letters from your betters soon as well. So that's it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, the Franklin's great channel. I've followed him for, I don't know, probably 8-9 years now. And yeah, really great channel. Do going forward. Thank you, the Franklin, for joining us.
Thanks. See you later, everyone.
Franklin. Take care.
Go on, man.
And then there were three.
Lady of Shallot, you have a excellent YouTube channel, mostly about art.
Yeah, just art and music. Yeah, and I'd like to start to do some live streams. It's been a huge learning curve for me because I had to basically teach myself how to make videos. So concentrated on that for a while. And that's the next step for me. But yeah, so please vote no, vote against anti-white apartheid, and think about the children and the future of this wonderful country that we all love and we want to continue loving. Yeah, and I'll try and get some live streams going soon, and please check out my videos, and everyone have a really lovely weekend, and thank you so much for inviting me. This has been great. Really enjoyed it.
Lady Shallot, you're the only woman on my
No,
Discord.
I know.
And you're a really based mother and a wife, and
yeah, I try to
I'm
be.
very happy to have you on anything I do. So go on.
Thank you. You do great. You do great work, and your Discord's fantastic. And yeah, and check out all the work of everybody on the stream. It's been great. We all really need to stick together and support each other.
I agree with that. We're outnumbered by our enemies.
We really are. We have so many enemies out there. So many.
Mm-hmm. And they grow ever more emboldened by the day, sadly.
Yeah.
100%. 100%.
And that is exactly why all of us... Sorry, I just want to do a bit of a PSA on that, Indrik. That's why people like us need to look to ourselves and look to our friends in our family and essentially stronger than them. It's within us to do it. And we can't lose sight of that. We really can't. We have to find within us all of the assets, all of the character, all of the strength of will to endure what's to come and to overcome it, because it won't be easy.
Chris Seymour just made a good point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The English are Adrival, numbered 5-1. We few. We marry few. We mount a band of brothers. That's absolutely truth.
Yes. Those of us here on St. Crispin's Day.
Yeah. While men in England now are bad, will hold their manhood cheap. Who did not fight with us this day. Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Indeed.
I totally agree with that, Furius. And I know you're a great classical history historian in terms of like the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, who I also love, by the way. One of my favorite people is Julius Caesar. Another of my favorite people is Marcus Aurelius. So Marcus Aurelius is still widely read today from his reflections and all this kind of stuff.
We should be thankful that his chief household slave didn't throw out his memoirs because he didn't want them published, and his servant actually disobeyed him, and it kept them. And now we have his meditations, and they're probably one of the greatest. Probably, alongside Seneca, in terms of like the Roman input into Stoicism, are some of the most important contributors. Doubtless. And it's funny. I often, my father, for instance, has worked a lot of his life. He's been here since the age of, as a boy, like 6 or 7 years old, and was immediately picking rocks and tree stumps out of the ground as a boy. As things were back in those times. And he does have sometimes a bit of a propensity to like fuss over things. And I sort of say to Dad, remember, Marcus Aurelius had to fight wars in Germany, was an emperor who commanded 30 legions, and governed a population of several or at least tens of millions of people, and had to hold an empire together. They've just gone through plague. We're just farmers after all. Like, it's not that bad, Dad. I'm sure tomorrow will be another day. I always use Marcus Aurelius in that context, because it is, and you think we should keep our lives in perspective. Like, there are men who carry greater burdens in life.
Well, I mean, as I understand it, Furius, your dad arrived in Australia not long after World War II, and was probably given a plot of land that hadn't been cleared at all, or this after he'd done quite a lot of work somewhere else. And he turned it into a productive farm. So I mean, a man can't do better than that, really, can he?
Correct, exactly. And there's a part of that sort of that hard settler spirit, which you say sort of made the hard fighting Australian soldier of the First and Second World War and even Vietnam, that we should treasure and should be a part of this country's proud history, and it should be part of our psyche and a part of our soul. And it would be very, it would be a great loss to forgo it and to forget it. And it's incumbent on any Australian who cares about the legacy of this country, who cares about its heritage and its posterity, should hold fast to that. In the same way that the real proper English hold true to the King's Yeomanry, from Agincourt, or hold true to the mythology of. When I say mythology, it happened, but the history of, say, Richard the Lionheart, or of Alfred the Great. This is why we cannot be have amnesia for history. We must hold true to it, because once we lose that, we are unmoored and deracinated, and then bad things happen as a consequence of that.
I totally agree, mate. I mean, there's a great book called A Town Like Alice, which have you read it?
I haven't actually. No, I'll have to add that to my
you
list.
should.
Neville Shute.
Neville Shute, who was a Pom who moved to Australia, lived here for years. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
But the thing is, if you watch the movie is only about the war. Whereas if you read the book, the second half of the book is all about this English girl who meets this Australian soldier in Malaya, trying to find him in Australia. And she ends up going to far north Queensland. And there he is, so she finds him. And then they try and set up this Aussie town, a bit like Alice, you understand, Alice Springs. And the movies don't go into that at all. But the actual book, the second half of it, is all about that. So there are these guys who've got this cattle station, but they're also, and they get married, obviously. But they're also trying to set up a town, with all the stuff that a town needs. And it's so sad to me that people don't realize that was what that book was really about. And as Lady Shallot correctly said, it was written by Neville Shute, who was a really good aircraft engineer, by the way, and moved to Australia after World War II, and liked Australia, as most good Poms always did, to be honest.
Yeah, indeed. And also, actually, just because the two of you here, because we're talking about books, one of my favorite ones that I first came across it when my mum read it to me as a boy. And then I read it myself when I was at high school. Have either of you two read Sun on the Stubble?
No, I've not read that. I've heard of it.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
It is actually a really lovely. Well, I mean, the family are quite poor and it's a hard life, but it's actually a very, wonderful story. And it really harkens to, that real sort of Federation style Australiana that, you sort of envision, like from, say, like the sort of period from either side of the war, or immediately after the war, the 50s and 60s, that sort of time period, like a real authentic, humble Australia that was very much a reflection of its own culture and its people. Because they're I think descendants of like Germans in South Australia, if memory serves me correct. They actually have a German surname, and this son is a bit of a misfit, and obviously with the war going on, there's a lot of hostility held Germans, and they got their name, and they're on this farm, and of course Australia had some issues in the agricultural sector leading up to World War II, and it's amazing. And that describe that this family doesn't have a lot, they're sort of barely getting by, but it's a real honest reflection of Australia from its time, and just the interactions of within the family as such. And it's a great, you need to, especially, I'm sure you'd both love it, but particularly you, Lady Shallot, as a mother, I think you'd really take a liking to the son, as like the boy, the main character. He's
that sounds lovely.
yeah, it's touching.
I'll have to seek it out. I don't know how I've missed that one because I read a lot, but I'll seek that one out. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
I'm a huge fan of Banjo Pass and stuff about Australia. In the 19th century and what have you, when a guy could arrive in Australia penniless, and he might make a fortune in the gold field, but that was very, very, very unlikely. But he might maybe start a farm or a station, and he might do all right with that. And in many respects, I mean, like in the 19th century, Australia and Canada and New Zealand were the equivalent for Britain of the American West. It's where the adventurous guys went to try and make the fortune.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, just a reply to Google. It's called Sun on the Stubble. That's the title.
Yeah, it's a pretty well-known book. I mean, I've heard of it. I just haven't read it, but I will at some stage, I guess.
No, it's a great book. Sorry, I just want to answer the comment. But yeah, cool. I have to say I've actually thoroughly enjoyed tonight's stream. I was gonna say we're nearly ticking on 3 hours, but I don't know. I'm of the view that we should try and get the five of us together again, because I had aside from the topic being a bit saddening and a bit fraught, I have actually thoroughly enjoyed tonight's conversation. So thank you for you both, and obviously for our two friends, the Franklin and Gard, who have since left. But I've it's been wonderful to catch up again, especially with you, Lady Shallot. I know a couple times we've but it's actually been quite some time since we've last caught up. So it's been a pleasure.
I know. We've been like ships in the night.
Tell me about it. But no, all good. And of course, it's been wonderful being on your channel again, Mr. Iron Duke. I appreciate the invite, and as always, it's a pleasure to be on the same.
I'm going to repeat
so thank you,
this,
sir.
Furious, just so everyone hears it again. I want to do a series of streams with you on Julius Caesar.
Yes.
Because I know you know this stuff so well, and I'm a huge fan of Julius Caesar, and I think the dudes who assassinated him were anti-Romans, basically. But that's just...
I was going to say the life of Caesar, only his civil war and his career after that, and then his fate at the hands of the self-proclaimed liberatores, the liberators.
Yeah,
and it's funny how
with the stupid fucking got your liberatory hat with two daggers next to it. Yeah, I've seen
exactly. And all the while, the entire population of Rome, or almost the entire population, is crying in anguish and gnashing their teeth and in despair. Their savior Caesar was killed by these self-entitled elites, and it's a lesson in the fact that administrations and governments who have it in for their own people is an older concept than we might realize. Like, we think this is a modern phenomenon, or I know, like, for instance, anyone who might follow my Twitter, for instance, will know I just rabbit on about the French Revolution and things deriving from the French Revolution. But
which were all shit.
Which has the consequences have been disaster for European civilization. But this idea of hostile elites goes back a lot further. I mean. And the particular situation in ancient Rome, which is something that both myself and Oron McIntyre have talked about, and I've talked about with others as well, is something to look into, because like I said, it's a phenomenon that is far, far longer than we realize. And there are many instances in history. It's just that Caesar's one is very famous, and obviously plays have been written about it, and TV shows have been made about it, and it's a very well-known thing in our.
But Furious, Caesar was also looking to invade Parthia and
right.
kind of turn things over, and everything we know, which is limited, I grant you, about his expedition, he was going to be able to do that because he was taking extra ballistas and extra archers and all this stuff that you would need to go and fight the Parthians.
Right.
I just would have liked to have seen the next 5 or 6 years of Caesar's life and what he might have achieved.
Absolutely.
That would
You're not
have
the only
been
one I enjoy.
so damn cool. That would have been so damn cool.
Absolutely.
Instead of being stabbed by a load of cowards when he had to defend himself with a stylus, for God's sake.
Yeah, exactly. Set upon like a pack of mangy dogs in the theater of Pompey. Yeah, but just as a passing note, I'll just give this reflection to people because sometimes we need a little bit. After all this carpet bombing of black pills, it's nice to have the odd white pill smattered amongst there, and that is that. that is in the midst of BLM, and we saw statues torn down and vandalized, and all these demonstrations, and a lot of let's call it resentment against European people and European civilization, right? Harbored by our own liberal brethren and hostile outgroups, is that at the same time, about 230 something years after his death, there were still Italians in Rome next to the old Forum laying down flowers at Julius Caesar's statue, where underneath on the ledge that his statue sits on, Dictator in perpetuo, our perpetual dictator. And 2,000 years after his assassination, Romans still lay flowers at his statue. That should be a little indicator that we can get through this and there's hope for the future.
Cool. That's a good story, Furius. It really is. I don't know. Look, we are faced with people who basically hate white European people, and they especially hate white European straight white males. This is the real world we are living in now. And we just have to convince enough people, male and female, because there's only two sexes, that this is the truth. And if we can do that, then maybe we can win. And I hope this little stream this evening did a little bit about that for Australians.
Yeah.
And just on that note briefly, if I may, because I mean, in the end, you're both from the British Isles, and I should say this because I know I spend a fair bit of my time castigating like the what you might call like the Anglo-American mindset, this British liberal tradition.
I think you're all right.
But thanks, mate. But I will say that one thing I want to observe is, because you did mention this stream, true, that it is particularly a testament to the civilizational capacity of the British and their mentality, that they are the ones who did, and I know people might say, oh, it's a boomer point, Furious, and okay, fine, I'll even accept it. But what I want to say is this, is that it was your kind, it was the Anglo-Saxon British people who, upon their own, of their own volition, did seek to improve large parts of the world and brought an end to slave trade at their own expense and with their own blood and treasure. And the one thing that should be remembered through that is that the utter ingratitude, the beneficiaries of that have shown, your people and your culture, because I mean, Italians didn't do it, right? I mean, that was a particularly British thing, is so saddening and disappointing. Like, you think, a people attempt to do something to improve humanity, objectively speaking, and with a sound philosophy and with, righteous intention. And yet it is, like the Anglo-Americans and the Australians who probably suffer the most of the malaise of being dragged through the dirt and being called, these white devil kind of, framing of it all. It is such a tragedy. It is so sad to think that, your ancestors went through this and this is what people today have to live in. I think that's atrocious. I truly think that in itself is atrocious and saddening to an extent.
Yeah. I don't disagree, Furious. Look, in general terms, the Western world owes its forming to the Roman and Greek world. Absolutely does. So yeah, I'm not going to disagree with anything you say there. And also, I would point out, as a more mundane fact, the British settlers in Kenya had no great problem with Italian settlers in Italian whatever it was next door to it.
Italian East Africa, yeah.
Yeah, they had no
Abyssinia, as
problem.
they called it, yeah.
Yeah, they had no problem with each other. And in fact, in the 1890s, when Italy lost that big battle, the Brits were quite happy to distract the Abyssinians from killing more Italian settlers, which strikes me as being entirely normal, to be honest. But you know, again, like in the 1930s, Britain deliberately made herself an enemy of Mussolini's Italy by going against Mussolini attacking Abyssinia. But why? Because look, Abyssinia was going to be better run by the Italians than it ever was by the Abyssinians. I'm sorry, it was.
Yeah.
So I just don't get that at all.
Yeah.
And that was largely the twat who in 1956 came totally unstuck because the Americans like bombed him up the arse. So, you know, there you go.
But such is history, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's my opinion. But I really seriously do want to do a series on Julius Caesar. I don't think that would be most interesting, and you'd be one of the best guys to do that with.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Be a pleasure to do it. I definitely think if we sort of line up some dates, maybe for sort of later this year, we'll do it. I don't know if it suits you, Andrew, because I obviously want to try and get some appropriate reading under my belt. I just refresh on things, but I don't know, maybe October,
come on,
November,
man.
something like that.
You've read all this anyway, but yeah. All right. Before we go, guys, I'm going to play us out with a tune. But before we do, Lady Shallot, you've already showed your channel, I think.
I have, yes, I have. I mean, I think are you putting some links in the notes?
Yeah, they'll all go in the description after the stream.
Fine.
Yeah,
Absolutely
no worries. Furious. Well, we can see you, as far as I know, mainly on Apostolic Majesty's channel, but I mean, you're also on Twitter, yeah.
Yes, if you'd like to sort of hear more of my ranting, I do that in letter form as well as speaking. So if you fancy, obviously follow on Twitter. But just to because I think was it Brucey, I think, was asking. I know you replied to him, Lady Shallot, but yes, I actually don't have my own channel.
He was actually asking if you had a channel, but I said you can find it on Apostolic and Semiogog and Academic Age. And all
if I might say so, Furious, you should really start like a classical ancient Roman history channel.
Yes.
You really should.
You should.
I would love to. I'm just in the middle of like literally developing an orchard with my dad. But no, I certainly.
Well,
love
I mean,
to.
that's even better though. But yeah,
it is. But I think next year will be a good time slot for that to happen. That's the objective, anyways, to sort of start next year. But just answer the question. I'm a roving squatter essentially. I sort of I jump around from Iron Duke's channel to Semigog's channel, but my main place amongst this sphere is as a co-host for Apostolic Majesty. And one of the reasons I don't have my own channel is that because he, if there is someone who's even better than me in this field, it is Apostolic Majesty. He's a certifiable genius, and to keep up with him, I have to do so much reading and write a great deal of notes that it's almost an occupation, it's almost a job, but it's a labor of love. I love doing it. Apostolic Majesty is a wonderful gentleman in his own right, and so if I can contribute, a teardrop to the ocean in our spheres, I consider it a pleasure. So that's why, just to answer your question, Breezy, that's why I don't yet have a channel. But if you like history, I recommend you go to Apostolic Majesty's channel. He has plenty of streams about plenty of subjects, and there's plenty of content there for you to enjoy.
Yeah, I totally agree. Apostolic Majesty is. I've been lucky enough to get him on my channel once. I'm looking to do another stream with him about the changes in Britain due to World War One, which I think will be a pretty historically crushing channel for anyone who doesn't get it. Because to me, Britain joining World War I in 1914 was the original sin of Britain and the Empire. Had we not done that, all subsequent history might have been different. I would like to thank very much Chris Gard and the Franklin and Furius Pertinax, and of course, Lady of Shallot, for joining this stream.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Cheers,
really,
Andrew. Thanks, buddy.
Mate, you guys are all brilliant. I will be putting your links in the description later on. But I'm going to play us out with a tune because I like music, I guess. I hope this one works anyway.
Oh goodness, I think we've lost Mr. Iron Duke. Should we entertain the should we entertain the plebs whilst Trad Boomer take his thing?
Oh goodness me! What can? Oh, good grief!
Oh my goodness! But sorry, go.
I think he's back. Is he?
Is he? Maybe. Oh, hang on, it's playing. He's not here, but it's playing. Whatever it is. Oh, buckle up, everyone.
See, this terrifies me because I've made videos, but I've never hosted a live stream. I've never hosted one. I've been on them, but I've never hosted one. And this terrifies me because I would not know. I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know what to do. This would be my worst nightmare. I couldn't cope with this. I would just switch it off, just leave.
Oh goodness, yeah. It's like play. Go back to like the 1990s and just have your screensaver playing in the background to save face, you know. Just
just get the Aboriginals on again. Just put that back on.
Oh goodness me. I was going to say we can't even share screen ourselves.
No.
Well, whilst we wait for Iron Duke to come back. Oh no, here he is. Hello, Mr. Iron Duke. How are we?
Here he is. Yeah. Oh.
Can you hear us, Iron Duke? Out of curiosity.
Hello? Is there anyone out there? Oh dear.
Oh dear.
Can you not hear the music, guys?
No. And you dropped out like twice out of the share screen thing.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Oh no.
Oh, only in Australia. Only in Australia.
Yes, with our telegraph station powered dial-up internet.
Yep.
At least you guys in the chat have been kind. First rate production. buffering. Oh dear. Maybe try giving it another crack, Iron Duke. If it doesn't work, we might just have.
You might have to call it a night.
Bilbo Balboa possums in the internet books again.
It probably is. We're plagued with them here. Absolutely plagued.
I will just point out one thing, guys. That the hang on, I've got to check this. The president of the British Australian community has told all British Australians to vote no on the referendum. So,
Ooh,
Yeah, I
yeah.
saw that. You posted
That's
that in the
spicy.
Discord. That was great. That was great.
yeah, he has said vote no because, you know, the British guys who were the founders of Australia have no special anything in the Australian Constitution, so why should anyone else? Is his point of view, which I totally agree with. Okay, I'm going to try and play this tune again. Let's see if it works this time. If it doesn't, I'll give up. Okay.
This looks
Looking
promising.
good. Looking
There we
good so far. Looking good so far.
Farewell to old England forever. Farewell to my ramparts as well. Farewell to the well-known bay, where I once stood looks such a singing to a lie at a tea, singing to a lie.
We lost the music, Iron Duke, but we can hear you again.
Yeah, we can hear you, but it's just so we've got the images, but not the sound. But oh well, kind of everything.
From what I heard, it's actually really good.
Jesus
Actually.
Christ,
Beautiful,
I don't
beautiful.
even know what to do about this.
I hate the modern world. I hate technology. You know, this is my.
You are not alone,
This
Lady
is my
of
worst
Shallot.
nightmare.
Jeez, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can
But
hear you.
the
We just have
music
no...
is not playing.
Yes, we have the
Yeah.
images, but no sign from the images.
Yeah.
Oh, fucking hell. All right, whatever. I'm going to just give up on it. There we go. Sorry, guys. Music didn't work out. There is a reason I put entropy streams on the top of my chat that you can send us super chats on. It's because I need to buy a new computer, and like being a retired military dude, I have no damn money, guys. I gotta tell you. I got a thing the other day from someone saying, "What are you gonna do with your savings? You're gonna turn it into gold." Trust me, if I turn my savings into gold, I would not even have a couple of sovereigns. So there you go. Thank you very much to my guest this evening, Chris Gard. Go and check out his YouTube channel. Lady of Shallot, go and check out her YouTube channel. The Franklin, a YouTube channel I've followed for, I don't know, like 8, maybe even 9 years now. One of the best Australian YouTube channels. Go and check out the Franklin. He's extremely cynical, but he's also a really good bloke. And also absolutely furious Pertinax, who often appears on Apostolic Majesty's channel. go and see him. He's also very active on Twitter, which I've only recently joined. So thank you very much to all my guests this evening. Thank you very much for you guys coming and watching us. And vote no in the Voice to Parliament referendum, guys. If you've got any sense whatsoever, vote no. Get all your friends and relatives to vote no. And on that note, I'll say Wars in Matilda, and we'll see you next time.
Good night. God bless.
Indeed. Goodbye, everyone. Take care.